Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we are covering another episode of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This is a groundbreaking series. It has to do with everything going on in the world today, our loss of sense of meaning, the ongoing social breakdown that is happening, the constant continuing division and fragmentation of our culture. And alongside of that, Vervaeke has been tracing a revolution in interest in mindfulness practices and blah, blah, blah. Let me get us live on Facebook before I go too much further.
Word. Yeah. And while we're going live, I'm going to make an announcement. In the next week or two, you won't have to be dealing with us being all like blurred out and dark.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, because we are getting whited out, or we're getting contrasted with the whited out background right now.
It's very nice to see the background, but since we can't afford the really, really, really nice LED, whatever studio lights and all that stuff, it looks pretty bad right now. But as the lead grip of this organization, if you don't know what a grip is basically the guy during a show that, runs the cables and, flies the ropes and does all that crap. So I'm the guy doing all this. I'm going to move us to the other side of my sunroom, and I'll be able to make some modifications there and look a little bit more professional, a little bit better every time. And for those of you who aren't watching, you probably don't care. You're like, I just listen as long as the sounds good.
Right.
But so yeah, bear with us for the next few weeks. It worked really good in the winter time when 8 o'clock was really dark outside, and all we had to deal with was the reflections off the windows. But now it's, we live in a part of the world where we actually have not a super drastic change between, summer and winter. Oh, and we have daylight savings time here too. So it's like, yeah, there was that change. But we're going to make everything look a little bit better.
It is what it is. It is what it is. But we appreciate you guys hanging in with us. And the visuals will definitely get better as the night grows darker. So this first, 20, 30 minutes is going to be a recap of our previous episode. Then we're going to dive into episode 33 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, the spirituality of relevance, realization, wonder, awe, mystery, and sacredness. Super stoked for this episode. Really been looking forward to this one.
So our Facebook peeps here.
Facebook peeps are in the house.
Can I start the notes from last week's episode?
Yeah, feel free, man. Feel
All
free.
right. So last week's episode, John Vervaeke was trying to lay out a example of a plausible naturalistic account of relevance realization.
Relevance, yes.
Yeah, excuse me. God, this is why we call it RR, because if you say it and listen to it too many times, it just starts, yes.
I think
Relevance.
it's because I started using the word revelation a lot, and now I'm throwing you off. Revelation, realization.
Relevance realization, yes. And last episode, he was basically given the brain its due. So we're learning about how the brain works as a machine.
Yes.
So let's see, where's the start of this? Okay, so what your brain is doing is it's shifting between. Okay, well, first off, the episode before last week's episode, we talked about compression and particularization, and compression is finding the average path between a set of data in the case of the way we showed it, plots on a graph. And particularization is the adherence to the more closer adherence to the actual data points. So one is more efficient and one is more resilient. Well, your brain is doing this. So when it's in its compression mode, it is synchronizing. It's the aha moment of synchronization. And then when it's in its particularization mode, it's the asynchrony. As far as neurons firing. So this is firing, synchronization of firing and the asynchronization of firing of neurons. And that's what he called a neural avalanche. It's basically your brain evolving its fittedness to any given situation.
It's breaking everything up, and then it's getting particular again, and then it's breaking up and taking in new information, then it's getting particular again.
Yeah,
so
and
the asynchronization and the desynchronization.
yeah, and so we're introduced to a term called self-organizing criticality, and a man named Vervaeke came up with the example of like an hourglass with sand. So, there's random variations in the sand, the gravity, the air pressure, the shape of the sand, the size of the pieces of sand, and it's falling down, it's creating a pile. But at some point, it reaches this critical phase where it can only get as tall as it can, and then it breaks down and widens out. And this breakdown, this self-organized, this criticality moment of order breaks down, and the breaking down introduces an emergent quality that wasn't there before. In this case, more of a base for more sand to then build the top and then break down again, and then build the top and break down again. And in your brain, your neurons are doing this where it's building up, it's synchronizing in one part, and then asynchronizing, and then synchronizing, and asynchronizing, and synchronizing, and asynchronizing, back and forth very fast.
Like thousands of times a second fast.
Yeah, like stupid fast. I'll just put it that way. So there, you could say that relevance.
Relevance
Okay, so relevance realization, is associable with self-organizing criticality. And if we remember, general intelligence is also has a strong relationship to RR. So general intelligence and your ability to go through this self-organizing criticality of synchronizing, asynchronizing, synchronizing, asynchronizing is we're thinking it's a good marker for general intelligence.
And by general intelligence, you mean self-aware, self-reflective, poetic, like what we're trying to bring about in AI right now.
And a general problem solver, the ability to adapt and solve many different criteria of problem.
Because there's a big difference between artificial intelligence and what would be artificial general intelligence, which is trying to emulate what happens in our brains, which we haven't gotten to yet with AI.
Yeah, and that's little g for general intelligence. And if we're right about this relationship, we can use these insights and this way of thinking, and then experimentation for many different applications, including the spiritual.
That's right.
So that was the first section before.
This can help us understand the spiritual, the higher consciousness experiences that happen, that are tracked and trained for through the ancient wisdom traditions of our past. So there's Buddhism, there's mystical Christianity, yoga, and so on and so forth.
And hopefully this will allow us to do it in a naturalistic way that's more of the nature, natural in the sense of you can look at it, like the non-mystical, the non-metaphysical, the non, like in a way, like you can look at the brain, you can watch the brain doing this.
Yeah, so we are proving right now in science that there are higher states of consciousness that people have, and we know through the literature that this is cross-cultural, but now we know through scientific verification that this is actually happening in people's brains, and it is the optimal state for a human being to be able to be in. It's just incredibly rare in modern times. Lao Tzu, who was a few thousand years ago, he said that thousands of years before him, there were many greats, and now they are very rare. And
now we're getting to the point where there's many greats again. Ain't that crazy?
Well, I hope so.
You got the Vervaekes, the Schmachtenbergers, the
That's
Petersons.
True, though. Yeah, they're starting to pop out. Yeah, Jordan Hall, Schmachtenberger, Ian McGilchrist. There's so many incredible, enlightening minds out there.
Yeah, and that's just scratching the surface of our small sphere of influence.
But Eckhart Tolle kind of people. Yeah, I picture Vervaeke as kind of a cross between an Eckhart Tolle and a scientist. I have to say Tolle because that's the most well-known figure in modern
Eckhart
times,
Tolle.
maybe.
Yeah. Is it Tolle or Tolle?
Well,
What does he
I
call
think it's
himself?
totally, but I would
Okay.
I would say somebody like Adyashanti
Okay.
or Muji or other names that people might
Yeah.
not be as familiar with. But in recent past, we had Ramana Maharshi,
Mm-hmm.
Jiddu Krishnamurti, and then you got to really go back and you start seeing people like Buddha and Jesus
Yeah, yeah.
Christ and others like that.
And maybe that's not like, maybe this is just an emergence of the fact from, excuse me, an emergence from the affordance of mass instant communication too, that we're seeing so many greats pop up, because who's to say that there weren't all
Before,
around
yeah.
the world a lot
I
of
think
them,
there
but they
were.
weren't able to
Yeah.
communicate as vastly
Yeah.
or intercommunicate
That's right.
as openly. I won't
That's
say
right.
as easily, because
Oh no, yeah, you used to get killed for it in some places too.
yeah,
for
that's why like some people
being
kept it secret.
this is why we took out Martin Luther. Not we, but people, humanity took out Martin
Humans.
Luther King in recent time.
Yeah.
RFK Senior, JFK, people like that are calling for peace. And not just peace in our time, but peace for all time, peace for all mankind, blah, blah, blah.
Peace as peace as a very good ideal.
And peace as the means, not merely the goal. Yeah, as
so-
the ideal. So you were talking about the brain, how it cycles through the self-organizing criticality. It synchronizes, then it desynchronizes, and then it reframes and reconfigures itself. So we see the brain doing this kind of data compression, then it complexifies and refits itself. So that constantly, moment to moment, the brain is doing relevance realization to refit itself to the environment. This is like an evolutionary process, and it does this on many levels in a highly recursive, complex, dynamic refittedness. So it's constantly, when we say recursive, it's feeding back in on itself. It's reinforming itself constantly on many, many different levels at once. So it's highly plausible that the self-organizing criticality that you were talking about, that Vervaeke talked about in last episode, is happening in the brain. We're trying to track down how does relevance realization happen in the brain scientifically. On this episode that we're about to get into, we're going to go into more the spiritual side of that. That's where this really starts to get intriguing. It starts to get very profound. So if this is right, there's major implications, such as the ways to objectively measure what's happening in the brain during higher states of consciousness.
Yes. So instead of just being a mystical thing, it's actually
It's still mystical.
it's still mystical, but you're actually able to like graph it, see it.
We're able to prove that it's happening. We don't know what or why necessarily, but we can actually at least
Enough to experiment further and get good results that are scientific,
and
not
learn how to precipitate it.
pseudo-scientific.
Yes, that's right. Learn how to precipitate it better, to cultivate it better in our lives, and to help all of these various secular and religious spiritual ideas start to come into conversation in a non-adversarial way. They can actually start to understand each other now.
So if this would be the firing of the neurons, like this is what we just talked about. So he moves
Firing and the wiring.
Yeah, so he moves on to the wiring, and we get into graph theory or network theory, which is a series of nodes and connections. And he gave 3 examples. One is your regular network, which is a circular network, and each node is double connected to the ones next to it. So, and then which is highly resilient but not very efficient. And then at the other end of the spectrum, which is very efficient but not resilient, is random.
It's random. These lines are going all over the place.
So what the
it's not a neat, clean shape anymore.
the optimal
connections.
The optimal
The optimal mode
network would be the small world network, where it's your circular network, but there's a cross or two that allow cross connections from non-directly linked nodes.
That's
but
right.
not too many where it becomes overly cumbersome.
right.
So it's the optimal balance.
Yes, it's the optimal amount of both. It optimizes for efficiency and for resiliency.
And he used the terms or the term path difference. So mean path difference. Random has a low mean path difference, as in to go from one point to another, it's less of a path you have to go, whereas a higher mean path difference is to go from one point it goes higher.
That's right.
The small world network is where the brain tends to go, because it doesn't want to have a bunch of very small paths all over the place You know, because if like one of them breaks down and that was just a main node that went off to other place, now it's screwed.
Yeah, it's not very resilient.
But you also don't want to have to like go all the way around the freaking circle to get to the point. You know, that's
So
just
the
not
regular-
an efficient usage of space, nor time, nor energy.
No, yeah. So the regular node network, lots of redundancy, but it's super resilient. The small world, the random is very efficient
Yeah.
because the lines are all over the place, but it's not very resilient.
Yeah.
The small world is the optimal amount of both.
Yeah.
So our networks are constrained in functionality by their own traits.
By the trade-offs.
By these
Yeah,
trade-offs,
yeah.
as well, yes.
And that's the
The brain would tend then to create small world networks,
Yeah.
and we have increasing evidence of this. So this is not conclusive, but it's cutting-edge theory. We're seeing design arguments for AI that are starting to correlate with working memory studies of salience networks in our brains. So we have a plausibly. Let me just figure out how to state this. The plausible way to increasingly explain relevance realization, the firing and the wiring.
Yeah. So to continue on with the wiring, there's I think Hobart was his name, and he had the idea of efficient hub networks and saliency networks, and this wiring end is also a scale invariant self-organizing system, just like I didn't say it before, but just like the firing end is a scale invariant, and as in you find it at any scale or
That's
many
right.
scales,
Very
or it
many-
doesn't change between it
All
doesn't
different levels.
it doesn't change depending on it doesn't change how in its functionality by changing its scale. So it doesn't matter what scale you're on, it's going to look pretty much the same from, you know, inside your brain all the way up. Like I've been playing Theo Town, which is like a Sim City kind of thing, and you know, building your road networks and all that stuff. You find really quick that, you know, the most efficient is not necessarily the most optimal or the, you know, most sturdy. It ends up causing problems, and you get traffic jams all over the place. So that's the big scale, you know, that's multiple humans in a space scale.
It all happens all the way down to our nervous system, all the way up to the complex layers of the brain. And this is what gives us the structural functional organization, the functionality, and the phenomenology of consciousness.
Yeah.
And many of the best accounts of relevance realization are showing it to be fundamental to human consciousness.
Yeah.
So we're seeing this relationship between consciousness and self-organizing criticality.
Yes.
So the brain's capacity to be able to break up and then reparticularize.
Yeah.
So that binocular rivalry, the brain goes synchrony.
Yeah, we
and
got
then
into
asynchrony.
the binocular rivalry. The example you got is something called the Necker cube, which is just a cube, but the outlines, and you can look through, and depending on how you look at it, one side seems like the front, and then it flips to the other side,
change
seeming
it.
like
Yeah.
the front. Well,
And that's an example right there of how you can change that view of what's relevant to you,
Yeah.
and how it shows itself.
so the brain synchronizes, and then goes into asynchrony, and then it does it again, and then it does it again. It does this flipping, and then there's Monty et al.
Monty et al. Yes.
Monty et al. Noted that in general anesthesia, like when you're coming out of going out of consciousness, your neural networks break down into its local networks.
Yes.
And then when you're coming out of anesthesia into consciousness, it moves back into small world networks. So what it's doing here, and this goes over into Dixon and what is this?
Stephen and Dixon.
Which their goal was to measure how much entropy is in the mind, and they noticed that as entropy drops, the behavior organizes, and well, that's self-organizing criticality.
Yep.
So, particularly with the anesthesia thing, so what happens is Schelling brought to our attention that about small world networks. You go from a regular network, which is, you know, the least efficient but most resilient system. Then there is this aha insight flash of insight, and now that is the moment that you get a cross connection.
Yes. Yes.
So what your brain is doing when you're coming out of anesthesia, it's going from that good, solid network, and then you're coming through and you're piecing your brain is literally piecing itself back together the way, maybe not exactly the same way it was before, but and it's funny watching people come out of anesthesia, because sometimes you say some funny stuff or whatever, or something that doesn't make sense, but it's just your brain trying to realize, like the little kid, is this real?
It's trying to reorganize itself back to reality. So as the brain passes out of consciousness, we lose the small world networks. As we come back, we regain them. We notice that entropy increases as well right before the moment of insight. And so this is what we're recognizing, that this is how the state of awe comes about as well.
Yeah, that moment of aha, ooh, like the second moment of aha. There's the original aha of your brain synchronizing, and then the aha again when it synchronizes again in a more efficient fashion, and has a better connection. And it's just like there's the that kind of thing.
So revolving from a regular network to a small world network.
Yeah.
In the moment of insight, we lose some resiliency, but we gain massive new optimization.
Yeah.
So the self-organizing criticality breaks up the regular network information flow, and it refits as a new small world network.
Yeah.
So you have this sudden enhancement of the small world network that leads to alteration and optimization of our fittedness to the problem space that we're engaging with.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a ton of convergence here. And we're seeing that this process of relevance realization, it's textured, it's dynamically flowing, it's salience tracking. And then we get into the framing, figuring, foregrounding, and featurization.
Yeah, so this is textured, dynamical, flowing, saliency network. So this is coming out of
through salience landscaping, which is perspectival knowing,
which
affords us a landscape.
Hold on real quick before you just jump into that. This is where Hobar system, the efficient networking system, or salience networks. This is the spot coming out of that.
The salience landscaping is the nexus of consciousness and higher order relevance realization.
So
this is a complex part to go over that I would highly recommend people just review the previous video on this part, because we're going to take too long going over.
Well, let me go through
this there a little bit.
Yeah. So the core of our participatory knowing is our featurization, foregrounding, figuring, and framing. That is our participation, because you're participating in finding the features, foregrounding which figures, figuring out what's going on, then framing it all. And they all, they have you'll featurization and foreground and then figure it out. But then once you figure it out, you see more features, and then, you can frame it again, and it all self-loops back.
Yes.
And then your perspectival knowing is your salience landscape from your perspective. What are you seeing that is most apparent? And then you go from that into affordance landscaping. Well, what can you do with these salience features? What becomes obvious? It's affordance obviation is the word he used.
That's right. So you have the salience landscaping that gives you the perspectival knowing, a dynamic situational awareness that opens the affordance landscape. Now you can participate in your relevance realization will help you by featuring, then foregrounding, then figuring and framing things for your consciousness. Am I understanding that right?
You've got it reversed, but
I think it's happening both ways at once. Anyway,
the way he wrote it out and everything, it's a bit reversed, but it's all, they are creating
they're all recursive,
a small world network within themselves. So the procedural knowing is ACT. You have
acting.
Active
mode.
No, ACT.
The ACT.
So within your salience landscape, you have centrality, which is the here-ness and what is relevant to you, what is important, the things that you import that are relevant to you. And then you have a dimension of the aspects. Yeah.
Okay.
So the perspectival end.
I forgot about that little.
So there's the here-ness, there is the perspective, and then there's the now-ness, which is the temporality. Which is the realm of that like Kairos lives in, at the right moment in time.
So the aspectuality is
dynamic
the sense
timing.
Okay, that's right. I forgot about this little what do you call that? ACT. Aspectuality is the sense of oneness, togetherness.
Yeah.
This is what gives us an account of why this is happening in our brains, or why people have this experience. Okay, and the temporality is the nowness.
Yeah,
that's
it's
the time.
when it's happening.
Okay,
and then the
centrality is the here-ness.
Yeah, you are here now.
So the brain is
doing this,
and
that's all three of them.
Expectualization.
Yeah. So your brain is here and now doing this thing. That's the three what do you call it?
And doing this thing is like that sense of togetherness, right?
The aspectuality is well, I have it written here a little weird, but yeah, the togetherness.
It's an enacted perspectival knowing,
and it's constantly unfolding as well. You're learning more about when you are, where you are, and what you're doing as you do it.
Yes.
So it's constantly unfolding.
And our relevance realization is showing us what things are important to us, what things that we need to import into our bodies, be it food, be it information, the things that become relevant to our minds, that appear at the forefront of our salience network.
Mm-hmm.
We're recognizing this is something I need or something I want.
Yeah.
This is where the relevance plays in our consciousness. So it needs to, so once again, we get back to, it needs to be an poetic being. It needs to be self-aware, self-conscious, for it to be able to act through relevance realization.
Well, and we've been kind of taking this, idea of salience landscape kind of for granted, but like all this, what we just discussed, as far as the here, now, and basically here, now, and aspects, who, or the perspectival end, that's all within the salience landscape, like what you've made. So your futurization, foregrounding, figuring, and framing, and then your affordance and everything that feeds back on, are all feeding into this landscape you've created for saliency to help create this landscape.
Constantly back and forth,
So it's, how do we give a artificial mind a salience landscape that is
able to
efficient enough, but not too efficient.
Because it's got to be able to update itself while it's informing,
and know what to care about for updating itself. That's where the autopoietic and caring about something comes in. It's like, well, how do you make a robot care? Well, I don't know.
It's got to learn how to co-creatively engage with its environment, understand how its interactions with its environment, the repercussions of those interactions, what things should be important to it and why, and you can only do that in relation. So we have learned that altered states of consciousness, as we were speaking about before, are linked to very deep changes in consciousness that are profoundly meaningful to us. So we're recognizing here that relevance realization is not merely cold calculus or computation happening in the brain. It's about how our body is making risky choices with limited metabolic time resources. Limited metabolic and time resources.
Yeah.
So we're it's always coming from an aspect of caring. There's a caring aspect to this.
Well,
and this is where he brings up Heidegger and Dreyfus and how we're going to get into
what's
that
most relevant to you
that we're about to get into now.
During a fire in an office is different than what is most relevant to you in a fire in your house, because of what you care about. In the office, you might care about, well, I left my purse in there, or some important paperwork. In a house fire, well, I care about my wife, or care about my kid. I care about some paperwork that's hard to replace. My dog.
I love the way he introduced this idea to us, because he was like, our brains can recognize relevant connections between very many different objects. So he showed the example of a bunch of markers. White. We can tell that these are all dry erase markers, because of the markings on them and their similarities. So our brain automatically groups them together. It knows to do that. Those are dry erase markers.
Even though
How does the brain know? So, what is the connection? And then Vervaeke just asks us blatantly without telling us about the fire story. He's just like, so what's the connection between your computer, your phone, your wife, and your children, your pets,
yeah,
and burning stuff, and your birth certificate? What's the connection between all these disparate things? And it's, well, if you have a fire in your house, if you just discovered that your house is on fire, these are the first things that are going to come to your mind. So your brain is just automatically doing this, constantly creating or utilizing its relevance realization to optimize its interaction with the world, with reality. And we're talking all about this for a reason. Relevance realization is central to our understanding of human consciousness. So we're starting to get closer to understanding how human consciousness occurs and how it may start to occur in AGI, in artificial intelligence.
Kind of like RR is like the center of a cross between our non-scientific understanding of the mind, and we'd call that like the traditional wisdom, and the scientific movement. And it's this thing that connects them. Well, what is the realization of relevance?
Yes.
Yeah, well, because I would consider the line of like wisdom traditions and stuff to be the spiritual line, and then
you said science twice, I think.
Okay.
So
so you'd have your one line, which is the old school wisdom practices and the way we understood the mind, and then the other axis would be the scientific end, and RR is in the middle of both of them.
Yeah.
Because, the old philosophers that didn't have the understanding that the brain is doing this thing with neurons and all this stuff, we're still talking about what is relevant and real in which times. And, like...
we have to be able to figure out how to determine what is real and relevant in the world today, especially in a time of such fragmentation and breaking down. So if we can find a way to do that is verifiable by science, then we might have done something extraordinary, especially since we're going to also be raising the import of wisdom in our times. This is also going to help us understand wisdom and how we may cultivate wisdom.
So that's the end of my notes for that first episode.
Right on.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I think we've covered just about everything. We're about to go into one of the deepest episodes yet. We're going to go into the spiritual side of relevance realization now, and we're going to
bust out your crystals, man. Burn some sage. No,
beyond all that. But we are going to definitely dive deep.
I'm spiritual, and they're like, "Oh God." It's like, no, I don't.
Yeah,
let's
demystify or de-fantasize the spiritual here, and let's get down into some deep, legitimate mysticism,
or de-fetishize it. Because it seems like spirituality is just something to be worn anymore.
Very much so. Yeah. Or it's just another ego trap for us, oftentimes.
Yeah.
And we're all going to go through that on this pathway. We're going to become over-identified with our new ideas, and then we're going to have to realize, I'm putting on a new mask again. I don't need that.
Yeah. Because, as far as, I'm using the word, de-fetishize in the sense of, you can imagine, the spiritual hippie guy, and they're always wearing crystals and natural fibers and stuff, and making it very obvious they do yoga and all that stuff. It's it's a skin suit you're wearing. Spirituality is not something that you wear. It's something you participate in.
That's right.
It's, do I participate in my shirt? Well, no, not really. I wear my shirt. My shirt participates in the things I do, but I don't participate in my shirt.
Yeah.
It's
are you feeling the oneness of the world around you? Are you feeling your intrinsic interconnection with everything and everyone around you? If you're feeling really broken off and separate and hopeless.
And do you act as if you actually believe it as well? Because there's you can believe it and be like, yeah, we're all connected, but screw everybody. That would not be an acting. Acting, and it's and even it's well, I don't really believe it, spirituality and all that stuff and God, but I'm gonna act that way because it seems I'm gonna act in the way that the spirituality dictates to gain wisdom.
More of an agnostic approach, which is
because it seems to work. I don't believe in all the mumbo jumbo. I don't know if I believe in it,
but I'm going to act as though it exists.
Well, I'm
going to do my best and try and live up to these higher ideals.
Shamanism. There's plenty of people that get into, we'll call it neo shamanism and taking entheogens and such, that well, we'll call them agnostics, but they used to call themselves like atheists. They don't believe in, and they're like, yeah, I talked to space aliens, but they weren't space aliens. They were just in my head, but still gained a lot of insight by doing it. So there's two ends. You just act as it, like what Jordan Peterson said about his faith, if you will, and still nobody really knows, because he just says he acts as if he believes there is a God.
Yeah. He's had some pretty profound experiences. There's one
That's
episode
all you can really do.
Yeah, of the Duncan Trussell podcast. So there's
Yeah.
one episode of the Duncan Trussell podcast where he's talking to Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson talks about a couple of really profound experiences that he's had, like dream-like experiences. And I'll have to look for that and reshare that up on the Actuali Facebook page, because it was really, actually very profound. So yes, he acts as though it does exist, but I'm pretty sure that deep down he's almost certain. He's just afraid to admit it openly.
Well, and also
because
I think
his
point was, it doesn't matter whether I believe
that
God
it
exists
doesn't matter,
or not.
But if you listen to the stories that he's told
I
Duncan Trussell,
think he definitely does.
he most definitely seems to.
But
because these are incredibly profound experiences that he shares.
Another point is just like, if you want to help the world too, you can't say, well, you have to believe. It's like, well, you can't make people believe, but you can show them it's like, hey, this kind of behavior leads to a better, more rounded life.
I think he's coming from a smart angle, considering the times and the transition that he's been making.
Well, it allows you not to be pigeonholed as a crazy Christian.
Yeah, it's so sad that this is what's become of us. We prejudge everything, and we group people into these super low resolution little sticker labels that are not even close to the actual thing. Our understanding of Christianity shouldn't be by those that fail to live up to it, just like with Buddhism or anything else.
Yeah, right. I'm not going to judge Buddhism by the
value of yoga by LA yoga, people.
Yeah,
or something,
precisely. Like you can't. Well, even like any philosophy or anything, it shouldn't necessarily be judged by the worst of the ones who couldn't live up to it. Now, I'm not talking about, say, like communism or fascism or National Socialism or anything like that, because the best,
these pseudo-spiritual systems,
well, the people that lived up to it the best murdered millions of people.
Right.
The best communist was the one with all the power.
Anything in the wrong hands, can be used in a detrimental way. But yeah, there's like very little that actually. So with communism, it's like a replacement for religion. The Marxism in general, the cultural Marxism that's infiltrated.
Their original sin is capitalist greed, and the way to free yourself from that sin is to be an active participant in the work. The work will free you from your sins, and I don't mean
you can hear how religious it already sounds.
Yeah, like, and you'll notice like.
But it doesn't give anyone a real genuine religious experience. It doesn't bring about more love or respect.
It'll give them a religious experience. They just don't have.
No. It won't give them an altered state, a higher state of consciousness religious experience.
Sure it does. When people like are having like it may not be one that's good for you, but they still go through that. They still get riled up, worked up. But that's not the religious experience. No, that's a religious. That's a a bad religious.
Yeah, we're crossing terminology here. When Vervaeke uses the term religious experience, he's talking about altered states and higher states of consciousness where the brain is working optimally.
Well, no,
and it's more loving, and it's more open. And this and that.
That's the ideal.
You're talking about
that's the ideal, but you can open up the brain and insert bad programming. That's there. Well, okay.
You're talking about cult like. Dogmatic.
Well, sure, but look at Gnosticism. Gnosticism is a system in order to induce states like that, surrounded by a sapiential group of people that can help you out the realizations. Give them a bad trip, fill them with rage, fill them in a community that is pushing them towards self-destruction and destruction of other people. It's still a religious experience. It's just a crap religion. And it doesn't further you and make you any better.
I don't know if I'd call it a religious experience. There's a better term for it.
I would like to see it mapped out in the head, but like the 2 minutes of what is that, Rage in 1984? where they all sit there and they had this religious experience.
Yeah,
of
I
seeing
think it's
people
supposed
and
to
they're yelling.
simulate something that takes the place of a true religious experience.
I think
a true religious
the
experience.
issue is here is I'm not saying, well, what is true
But
or not.
Vervaeke
But
gave it to us in the Higher States of Consciousness episodes, and he gave us all of the description of what the religious experience is. So we're talking about sense of oneness, sense of understanding.
Sure. You're one with your group of people, and you understand them. But I guess what I'm saying is
The true religious experience, you understand.
I just have a problem with the word "true." That's my issue with that. It's a bad religious experience, not a true religious experience, or not true. It's a bad one because I think.
Well, I think we're using the term
physiologically, and even methodologically, it's the same. It's just what are you putting in while you're having that experience.
Phenomenologically, it's not the same. It's not the same experience. It's not the same phenomena that's happening. You're having something else that you're having the ideological possession thing happen. And people get into mob mentality and they get into these other things that might substitute in place of religious experience for a time for people, but they're degrading. They're not uplifting.
I'm not saying it fulfills the same function in as far as the longevity of the species, but as far as
so I'd call it a pseudo-religious experience. I don't think it's a real religious experience.
It's just a bad religion. It's a religious experience within a bad religion.
We could say that. I can agree on that. But yeah, I think he gave us a different term. I'm just
talking
previously
about the even the more like mechanical end of it. Your brain is still going through like when you walk into a good service at a good church and you get that wow and that overwhelmed feeling. It's the same feeling as the initiates and adherents to what we'd call like more of the cult the cult ideology, and you get that same thing. Your brain opens up, but the paths it forms and the understanding its forms are perverted, and that's why we're warned in religions about bad religion that is anti-religion. We could call it an anti-religious experience.
I would call it anti-religious because it's not going to have the phenomenology of the actual religious experience as Vervaeke describes it, when we have higher states of consciousness that give us wisdom. Well, it works like the way that Twizzlers work to satiate your hunger, but it's not good for you. It's not real food.
It worked to persecute uncounted millions of people and murder them. That was the point. That was the point of this religion. Take it out on the evil capitalists. Yeah. It worked great. Yeah. It got a lot of people to participate.
If they were having genuine religious experiences, then they wouldn't have been experiencing unconditional love for their fellow man, even those with whom they disagree, so they never would have been captured by the ideology. Yeah. That's the real religious experience.
If it wasn't so filled with, and this is the scientific term, if it wasn't filled with bullshit, it wasn't it's a sophist version.
It's giving you a bunch of shit that makes you feel salient. You're getting a boost of some nice endorphins because you're part of a group, but you're not getting the actual religious experience of awe and wonder, interconnection, oneness, unconditional love for everything and everyone, the sense of oneness with everything and everyone. You're not getting that stuff.
If that's your goal, you're definitely not getting it. But unfortunately, with say like communism, fascism, National Socialism, the big baddies. The point wasn't that. The point was to rescue themselves from an oppressive universe and escape the prison.
Sure.
It's
you're right that experience can happen
because they need to rise above God. Like literally, the language of the Communist Manifesto and Marx's other works are religious and spiritual. Ascension, rising above things. But Marx was a materialist, so he didn't give two craps about the God up above. It wasn't God up above that is the one that has his finger on you. It was the capitalist, the bourgeois.
There was nothing transcendent that you're growing towards.
Even though there's this idea of the socialized man.
Yeah, so you're not transcending your sense of self and your egoic sense of self by any means in this experience.
No, definitely not. Just like you're not actually getting in touch with spirituality just because you wear yoga pants and go to yoga and
that's
drink.
Right. Yeah. And even if a lot of Christians or Buddhists don't experience the higher state as well, and that's to no fault of their own necessarily. It's just depends on where they're learning, what they're being taught, and it's
how willing are they to counter their teachers? Because even if your teacher's right, you want to counter them if you think that you're right, so they can promptly show you that you're not.
Yeah.
But if you're just like, okay, I'll do whatever you say. Okay, do this thing. I said this 10 times, and I'm good, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Like there's a little more to it.
Yeah, and I like that
But
Vervaeke breaks down the various different religious schools and wisdom traditions for us so that we can see what is working and why is it that
that's why
someone
this
can
is
become enlightened
this
through
is why
Buddhism
this
or
is
Christianity or Stoicism or what have you.
that's why this series and his further works are really important, because it helps define, okay, what is this thing that we're going, or okay, what's the ultimate thing we're going towards? Okay, working better as humans with each other, and constantly emerging from ourselves, phoenix like, if you will. Okay, what are the components that we use to do that? What are the things that we use to do that? And then where has it gone wrong? Where has it gone right? What works better? And then, okay, let's build something better. Now, instead of fishing around in the dark with pseudo occultism, perverted Gnosticism, or devilish Hermeticism,
Yeah.
which can be very dangerous. And I'm not knocking Gnostics or even Hermeticists, but in the wrong hands, a phrase can be
Turned
very
real.
detrimental.
Yeah.
In the right hands, that phrase could save the world. So that's why certain things are hermetic, hidden, sealed.
That's a good way to put that.
Yeah, but
That's a very important point, and I'm glad that we hashed that out, though, because, whoa, what happened to the light?
hold on one second. Technical difficulties.
I'm glad we hashed that out, because it's okay for us to disagree a little bit as we're trying to understand things with one another, with our friends, with our family, and with perfect strangers.
Well, super cheap.
It might have cashed out.
Super cheap Walmart light just bit the dust, so I'm going to do a quick rearrange of the last existing lights we have, and
Yeah. Well, we're about to jump into it, guys.
Let's go ahead.
Let's go ahead and let's jump into episode 33 of John Vervaeke's Awakening series, the spirituality of relevance, realization, wonder, awe, mystery, and sacredness. We'll make it work. That's not bad at all, though. We're getting.
Pull yours in front of your camera.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah,
We'll fix this here.
I got
once we
these
get
at the
Vervaeke.
Wally World.
Old China Mart. CCP Mart, let's call it, because the Chinese people are, I'm sure, awesome as people of any other nation. It's just
Chinese Communist Party and the PLA.
It's that communist party that took over China. We're actually calling Taiwan China, the people's.
Yeah,
the
it's East Taipan.
Yeah, and then at some point in time, the UN and the US just stopped calling them that. But that's where the real government of China escaped to. So that's what we should be calling China, is Taiwan. And
Yeah, let's just start calling China Taiwan. That would really
the People's Republic of China is not, unfortunately, the legitimate Chinese government. We should be very careful talking about that, because they've got stock in everybody nowadays, and even YouTube doesn't like you talking about that. But here we are. Sorry, LeBron James. I hope you didn't ruin any of your deals.
I'm not saying sorry to LeBron James. I have very, very little appreciation.
Man, what a
for
talented,
that man.
amazing human being. How did he fall for that? How did he fall for the CCP?
Personally, I think he's dumb as a box of rocks, but that's just me.
There was a big WWE.
I'm really well educated, or something like that. And he's always seen with a book, but it's always on the first 2 pages.
Well, he's a genius when it comes to ball, and
oh sure, yes, but
as far as being an
intellectual,
athlete,
he is not.
apparently not. But I guess he's a busy guy. He's training all the time.
Well, some of it.
Even Jon Stewart gets things wrong sometimes, and he was really on point when it came to the vid when he got on to his old buddy's show. Anyways, we're going to jump onto another side here, guys, and we're going to say more of the bad words you're not supposed to say nowadays. We're trying to be good. We love you, big brother. We do.
I don't. Sorry.
I'm looking for the men in black running up to get him.
I am the least of their worries.
No, see, nowadays all they got to do is just shadow ban you, and
yeah, right.
And to help us fight that shadow ban, guys, hit the like and the subscribe. And if you're enjoying the series, make sure that you smash like and subscribe for Mr. John Vervaeke's channel as well. There's a lot going on there, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Much more beyond this Awakening series. But now for us, we're about to dive into it. We're on to episode 33. So let's go, guys. Here we are.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Last time, I suppose I probably taxed your attention quite a bit because we got into, I tried to keep it as accessible as possible, as jargon-free as possible, but we got into some of the nitty-gritty of how we could potentially give a naturalistic explanation of relevance realization and see it potentially in being implemented in terms of self-organizing criticality and small world network formation in the brain, and that in turn could help us to understand general intelligence, insight, and a lot of the functionality, and I was even arguing a lot of the phenomenological aspects of consciousness. And that gives us, right, reason to believe that we may be able to use this machinery to elegantly explain a lot of the central features of human spirituality. We've already seen that this relevance realization is transjective. It's about our fundamental connectedness to the world, connectedness of mind-body together. I'll have to come back to connectedness to other people. that relevance realization is always deeply affective, that at the core of relevance realization is a caring that is integral to your cognitive commitment of your precious cognitive, metabolic, and temporal resources. That we can see a lot of the stuff that Heidegger was talking about when he was trying to get us back to this primordial sense of meaning in the transjectivity of relevance realization, and that interpretation of Heidegger comes via Dreyfus and our being in the world. I want to pick up on that now. Instead of just being suggestive, I want to now try and carefully unpack what I want to call the phenomenology of relevance realization in terms of meaning making, the kind of meaning making that ultimately we have gathered together by the term spirituality. So let's gather what we've done. Okay, so we had problem solving, right? And we went over this again in more detail last time. We have insight, categorization. All of these things seem to be, right? Demonstrative reference, that's the Finsting. And we put that within, right? The salience landscaping, consciousness, and closely tied to it, working memory. And then, of course, tied to that, of course, is G, right? Got inference. That was the stuff with Cherniak. We've got communication. All of this right, is feeding into relevance realization. We could give a naturalistic structural functional organization of it in terms of self-organizing criticality and small world networks, where these are understood to mean families of processes, right? And these are deeply related together. And as I've said, we've already got that this is inherently transjective. We've got this is an ongoing, involving, that's what I'm trying to get with caring and participation, and how, right, you know, the know-how is grounded in the situational awareness, the perspectival knowing that's grounded in the participatory transjective coupling to the world, right? So it's this evolving optimization process of your connectedness, your fittedness. To yourself, to the world, to other people in communication, for example. All right. I've already given you an argument about how via complexification, right, this gives us an account of our capacity for self-transcendence, our capacity to produce emergent functions, and we saw that even connected with insight, and we can see that at work directly out of this now. Why self-transcendence, the capacity for self-transcendence, to overcoming self-deception, is actually endemic to your meaning-making machinery. Okay, in connection with that, of course, this would also explain, these two are related, your tremendous capacity for self-deception, for bullshitting yourself, right? Because this has to do with ultimately your salience landscaping, etc. As I mentioned, and that's part of here, the connectedness that's so central to people's sense of meaning in life, being connected to something that, right, is in some sense greater than them, other than them in an important way, but to whom their identity is nevertheless coupled. I've tried to show you how it gives us a nice account of perspectival knowing and participatory knowing. And then how these two can come together in procedural knowing. We'll talk a bit more about that. But the creating of affordances, we've talked multiple times how affordances are the obviation of a transjective relationship within which my skills, my capacity to solve problems can be reliably trained and developed. Okay. Talked about, again, like I said, that this has an aspect of deep caring in it. So you're going to find the sense of significance here. This is something you care about, you bind yourself to, you commit yourself to in a very important way. I already suggested, and I tried to give you that with the account last time of insight, how this can help explain what's going on in altered states of consciousness while you're getting both a change in your salience landscaping, a change in your relevance realization machinery, how it can be altering your optimal grip. Optimal gripping is also a case of optimization that fits within this. Help to explain our higher states of consciousness. Right. Now I want to start pointing out some other aspects of it that I think contribute to it being, how do I want to say this, represented, understood, grasped as spiritual in nature. Let's take a look at some of the features of relevance realization that have come out of this argument. So these are all going to be ways in which we experience this as our fundamental framing of reality. But that's good, but it has a sense of us standing outside. We're inside the framing. We are participating in it, okay? It has to do with, right, the framing is, right, at the level of the agent arena. It's not just looking out, it's the inclusive relationship. Okay, but I want to point out to the fundamentality of this. What I would argue this is a way of interpreting what Heidegger means by the primordiality of what he was talking about. I'll criticize Heidegger later. I have criticisms of him, but I'm also trying to point out how this work, which seems so technical in some sense, can be connected to some very, deeply existential and phenomenological philosophy. Okay. So first of all, the fundamentality of this. Okay, so notice that this is ultimately preconceptual in nature. It has to be, right? Because it's at the level, it's below your level of propositional processing. In order to have concepts, you have to categorize. In order to categorize, you have to have demonstrative in order to categorize, you have to have relevance realization. Also, in order to categorize, you have to first have demonstrative reference, which is pure preconceptual relevance realization. So this is ultimately preconceptual in a deep way. Okay? And in that important sense, right, it's ultimately pre-propositional. Pre-propositional. If what we mean by belief, and it's often what we mean by belief, is the assertion of propositions and their implications, then relevance realization is taking place at a level fundamentally deeper than the level of belief. Now, you understand that I'm not proposing that this is just a bottom-up process. Of course, how we conceptualize things and how we have beliefs about things feeds back down. That's why all those diagrams have feedback down arrows in them. But we're talking about belief ultimately as an effect. It feeds back and affects, but it is ultimately an effect of relevance realization because, of course, this fundamental framing is pre-inferential in a deep way because inference, it's pre-communication. That means well, I learned this from other people. Well, no, you can't. There's a sense in which you can refine it from other people, but you can't ultimately learn it from other people because learning presupposes it. Being able to pay attention to your mother and pick up on how she's communicating with you and make inferences from that so that you start to categorize the world and figure out that this is a bottle presupposes this. And that points to something else. This is pre-experiential, not in the sense that it's happening to you before you have, like in some previous life. What I mean is that your meaningfully structured experience, the level of common sense obviousness, is a result of it. It does not generated by the level of common sense, obvious, meaningful world. It is generated, that world is generated out of relevance realization being coupled to the environment. So it is pre-experiential. It is pre-egoic. I think in some important ways it's also post-egoic, but I'll come back to that, right? Because your agency and the world as an arena in which you have a narratively structured, reliably acting ego emerges. These co-emerge out of relevance realization. That's why they are primordially connected together in participatory knowing. So relevance realization is pre-egoic. By the time you have you in a commonsensically obviated world of meaningful objects and situations, relevance realization has already done a tremendous, tremendous amount of work. So it's pre-egoic. It's pre-normative. Now that's going to, some people are not going to like that. I'm going to qualify that. It's pre-normative in the sense that it's your primordial normativity. Before you can assess truth, things have to be meaningful to you. Before you can assess beauty, they have to be aspectualized for you. Before you can assess goodness, right, you have to have agency and arena. This makes possible your normative judgments as to what is true, what is good, and what is beautiful. I'm not saying that those judgments are reducible. That's ridiculous. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying this is primordial to them. And that was part of what I think Heidegger was going on about. So, what I want to talk about now is doing a little bit more of filling out, putting all of this together. Notice how much this points to aspects of human spirituality. You have self-transcendence, but you also have foolishness, you have the connectedness, you have the perspectival and participatory knowing, you have the co-creation, the co-emergence, the co-determination of the agent arena. You have the core, right, binding together of your agency, your caring, and your cognition. Think about Plato, right? It helps to explain the association of altered states of consciousness, and especially higher states of consciousness, with human spirituality. And notice a lot of the features that, that our spirit is somehow, it's deeper, it's deep. Like we have all these deepness metaphors and profundity metaphors, right? Because look what I'm showing you, that it's deeper than your ego, it's deeper than your judgments of truth, goodness, and beauty. It's deeper than your propositional thinking, it's deeper than your conceptualization. The way that can be spoken of is not the way. It is pre-inferential. It is pre-communication. It is pre-experiential. It is a fundamental grounding of your being and your being connected, because I'm arguing that those are one and the same. A lot of what is captured by your spirituality is captured by this, the way this machinery unfolds phenomenologically, perspectively, in a participatory fashion.
Yo, we're back.
So, RR
Relevance realization
sits in the middle, and the way he draws it is there's there's lines coming in and lines coming out.
Yeah, lines coming in from the left side, and then lines.
Yeah, so
right.
So coming from the left side is your causes, for lack of a better word, but the inputs going into relevance realization, which is problem solving, insight, categorization, demonstrative reference, consciousness, inference, general intelligence, communication.
Okay. Yeah.
And then on the effect side, you have your complexification, which leads to self transcendence.
Biocomplexification, yeah.
Yeah.
This accounts for self-transcendence and emergent functionality, the overcoming of self-deception.
Yeah.
But then you have...
You can deceive yourself, particularly...
This is a double-edged sword. This is what we were trying to talk about earlier. You can also self-deceive yourself. And so we have pseudo-like religious ideologies out there that people will buy into because they're looking for something that gets them to the transcendent. And this place, and then this, say cultural Marxism as an example, can imitate a lot of those features that religions have that people are looking for, a sense of meaning and belonging, for instance. So it's giving you this is what everything means, and this is how you're going to belong.
Or even, like when we get into the parasitic processing, your heuristics that would be reliable or lead you into a recursive self-defeating cycle that reaffirms the... Yeah, you can turn that light down too with the button if you want to.
Okay, that was a little better.
But not just being deceived by thinking you're on the right path, but being deceived is in the sense of like maybe not necessarily thinking you're right, but like when you're in your head and you're going and you're going and you're going, it's like, and you're running that conversation, you're just like, yeah, well, you're bullshitting yourself. So still on the effect side, we have connectedness as an effective relevance realization.
A deep sense of connectedness. Yes.
This is where your perspectival knowing, participatory knowing, procedural knowing, your caring, which is significance, and
then altered states of consciousness that give us a more optimized grip on reality, and also higher states of consciousness that help optimize us.
Yeah.
Fit in there.
Yeah, and so fundamental framing is where we got into the pre's. It's all the pre's. So like RR is before everything. It is, it is preconceptual. Before you have the concept of something, you have to realize the relevance of, say, maybe its features or its purpose. Like, what does it do? The marker. If you don't know it's a marker, it's just a cylinder where a piece comes off of it and it leaves stuff on you.
Right.
You
right.
know?
So this is where we get into the spiritual aspects, the fundamental framing of reality, the pre-conceptual.
Yeah.
So this is below the level of conceptualization, below the level of ideas, beliefs, concepts. So pre-propositional, pre-assertion of belief.
Yep.
It's deeper than belief, concept, ideas, as I said. Pre-inferential and pre-information.
Yeah, because before you
learning presupposes relevance realization. You got to be able to recognize what's relevance before you can learn.
Yeah, before you can infer something, you have to realize what is relevant,
Yes.
and before you can communicate it or have it communicated to you.
So even when someone's beginning to teach
because
you,
somebody could be holding up like a beer can and say, if you don't speak English, and I'm going beer can, beer can, beer can, beer can, beer can, you have to go, okay. This guy, he's saying something at me. He's holding this thing into his hand.
He keeps looking at it.
Oh, God, it's got beer in it. And he keeps pointing to it. Oh, beer can. Before you realize it's beer can and communicating beer can, you had to realize, oh, there's this dude. Oh, he's interacting with me.
he's trying to tell me something.
Oh, there's beer in that can. Oh, beer can. The word for this is beer can.
Okay.
Okay, but you had to have a relevance realization before all of that.
Yeah.
Before all of that.
Yeah, before you could infer what that person is talking about.
And
So it's pre-normative.
Yeah, and
Before we can even access what am I writing here? Truth.
Yeah.
Before we can even assess the truth of it, it has to be meaningful to us.
Yeah.
So this makes possible the realization of truth, beauty.
Yeah.
That's so profound.
Well, yeah.
How is that we have this capacity built into us? This gets into Ian McGilchrist's work, which is he is theorizing that value is fundamental in the cosmos. It's fundamental in the universe somehow. Truth and beauty and goodness are actual, real, fundamental aspects of reality. They're there before everything, and he's proven this through neuroscience as well as Vervaeke is doing it, just from a different angle. But look into Ian McGilchrist's work, everybody. The Master and His Emissary and The Matter with Things are two of his books that have come out recently.
So a short way to say a long thing is the realizing of what is relevant. This self-organizing criticality and small world network back and forth happens before or below or inside of every aspect.
Every aspect of our brain's cognition.
Yeah.
Relevance realization is there before it. It's
Well,
like the ground
even
that
the
makes
things
everything possible.
that lead into relevance realization, like problem solving. In order to create the problem, you have to realize what is relevant, in the environment of the problem.
Yeah, to be able to categorize, you need relevance realization.
Yeah,
you got to be able to tell what stands out in those different things that you're trying to categorize and connect.
One of these things is not like the other. You have to have that.
To have insight, to have general intelligence, to be able to communicate, to be able to do anything that our brains do, you've got to be able to recognize relevance. This is central to consciousness. So what Vervaeke's hitting on here and proving with all of these complicated terms is something that's actually happening in our brains, and we're drilling in closer than we've ever gotten to an explanation of human consciousness, but it's taken us into the spiritual realm of the ineffable. And these next parts is where this episode gets really, really interesting. We're about to drop in there. Yep. So he talks about the binding together of character and cognition is possible through relevance realization, like the Stoics. They were so good at that. This explains the association of religion, of old religious teachings and wisdom teachings with higher states of consciousness, and these terms of profundity and meaningfulness, these metaphors that we're seeing in these ancient writings, or in people that have a higher state experience. They talk about how profound, how home and that one with everything, and how meaningful it was, and all those kinds of terms come up again. So this is a fundamental grounding of being and of being connected with the world.
That's evolving and involving.
That is evolving and involving. That's right. And involving, he meant because of the participatory and procedural states.
Well, you're involved in it.
Yes.
You're involved in the evolution of it.
Yes. Yes. That's right.
And
That's right.
You're involved in the optimization of connected fittedness as well as evolving into optimized connected fittedness.
Yes. Yes.
And that's I like the word what was it transjective?
Transjective.
You know, it's
beyond subjective and beyond objective, or pre-subjective.
It's something that emerges from the dance between two seemingly contradictory things, you know, let's say opponent processes.
There you go.
Because the self-organizing criticality and the small world network, you could, look at as an opponent process, like what we talked before with your nervous system.
It's like the two sides of the word, meaning to the word realize.
Yeah.
Where one sense is to realize, like to wake up to something, other senses to create something and realize it into the world.
Yeah, to make real or...
So transjective is... Yeah, so to be able to have subjectivity and objectivity, you need first transjectivity.
Yeah.
To be a thing, which is... Now we're getting into the transcendent realm here. Is there something that was before and still is before everything that is making all of this possible? Vervaeke is not going to answer that for us here, but we're going to get closer to it and to the remarriage of science and spirituality than we have ever been. Mm-hmm. So here we are, guys. I think we've covered everything.
I'm at 1704, and that's when he's sitting very politely right before that spot.
Cool. So we're just
look at that little Buddha belly he's got going on.
Yeah.
Just holding all of his energy.
I think you're right
in
too.
there.
You said last episode it looked like he lost a little bit of weight. He is losing weight.
During this, he's been losing a little bit of weight. Hopefully, it's from getting fit and not like stress. Starving, and I'm.
Hopefully it's because he's. It's not because he's stressed. You were saying I just switched the wrong screen.
Oh yeah, but what I was saying is like when somebody comes up to you and it's like, oh yeah, you look so good, you're getting skinny. And it's like, oh yeah, I've been starving and super stressed out, and you haven't noticed that I'm losing my hair, but. Great, thanks. Yeah, but in the case of John's, like, he's he does the physical movement practices. And
he does a lot of Tai Chi. That's his thing. Yeah, he does a lot of Tai Chi, and he's been hanging out with Relevance, who does a lot of movement practices as well. He's the free running guy that I was talking about that runs through the woods and does all kinds of movement, meditative exercises. Really cool stuff. Everyone look up Relevance as well. Rafe. Kelly, Kelly.
Not too long ago, we thought ninjas were these magical, creatures that used magic to hop high walls and run across roofs and somehow stick to your ceiling.
Look up.
Turns out humans can do it.
It's so cool. You see guys jumping from tree to tree and doing crazy stuff and really cool free running.
Dude, I've seen people jump like literally like 30 feet, hit the ground, roll, and just keep running. And
right.
And I had a buddy of mine who fell from 45 feet and he didn't hit the ground running. He remember. Oh, you were there. Do you remember Josh Bell?
Yes.
Yeah. No, he didn't. So to see he got real messed up. Let's just put it that way. He's fine now and he still rocks. Yeah. Shout out to you, man. First thing I said when we went into the hospital, I'm like, you can't fly. But when it comes to the parkour stuff, somebody put their mind to it and they figured out a way you can jump 30, 45 feet down. And at the last moment, transfer your momentum into a different direction and just keep freaking going.
Keep going, yeah.
And it's not magic.
Not
anymore.
We're built to do it.
Yeah.
When you see people doing incredible parkour, you get a feel for what humans were like as hunters in our prehistory. We were amazing. We were probably that. Oh, for sure, we were that amazing because we're just rediscovering these agility movement.
The body hasn't really changed in the past 200,000 years, including the brain. So,
right.
This ain't. Maybe it's the first rodeo we've done with the technology to be able to broadcast radio and all that stuff. But as far as all the other being able to build stuff and put rocks together and use your body in unique ways and garner wisdom and all that stuff, we've been doing that for 200,000 years, man, or longer.
Yeah, for sure.
For
sure. Yeah.
But humans, we rock.
humans
Sometimes
are
we
amazing.
suck, but we rock most of the time.
It's true. It's true. We have our saving graces, and they're powerful saving graces.
Well, that's opponent processing. You've got the evil and good are opponent processes as well.
Yeah.
When defending yourself from a cougar that wants to eat you, you got to have enough evil to not care about it and want to stick your thumbs in its eyeballs and take it out.
Yeah.
It's pretty evil.
Well, you got to at least have that level of wild courage, you could say. There might not be anything malicious in it, but you do need to be able to have healthfully integrated your monster in such a way that you can bring the monster out when you need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
when you say no, that is a good harnessing of evil, because no is, no, I'm not going to do it. And if you try to make me do it, there's going to be something bad that's going to happen to you when you truly say no.
Mm-hmm.
Not, oh no, but like no.
Yeah.
Like when your parent says no to you when you're a kid, or you say no to your dog, the dog's just like, I feel the threat. I feel the evil. So Satan, or I think it's Satan. I think that word means more of like a judge. So the big bad evil guy is really the
Because
judge.
there's also like the very envious, judgeful side of God that dominates the Old Testament.
Yeah, I don't know, but there's a reason why we have these two different things, and it always seems a battle between the two. It's like, well, it's in us. But before
It's pretty ingenious though, because nature does feel ruthlessly neutral to us. I mean, there's earthquakes, there's tidal waves, there's hurricanes, there's
Forest
sharks and tigers and fierce predators. It isn't just fluffy bunny rabbits and butterflies out there making friends with one another. It's definitely a harsh environment, but it also is so beautiful, and there's so much symbiosis, and there's so much cooperation and friendliness that happens cross species even. So it's quite the mix. And and we're about to dive into trying to understand that a little bit further here.
Speaking
guys.
of cross species, I was just watching orangutans and otters at a zoo. They put their enclosures together, and then they made a pass where the otters can get over to the orangutan side to play with the orangutan.
Oh, that's awesome.
And most of the time, they're just messing with them. The orangutan likes it, but he's just like, "Get out of here, you little spark!" I'm being a grumpy old man.
A little annoyed after a while, but then we'll play for a minute sometimes. That's cool.
Boy.
All right, guys, we're gonna jump back in here, and I'm gonna rewind just a wee bit.
There we go.
There's these aspects of this that are therefore, in a fundamental sense, unconscious, but there are deep aspects of this in our consciousness, and there are deep aspects in this in how our cognition and our consciousness are connected to the world. I want to use a term here, and then I'm going to develop it, for the whole right-hand side. I want a term for all of this, right? So that I don't have to keep just sort of gesturing and flinging my arms in a semi-organized fashion at the board. I'm going to use a term here. I'm going to use the term religio, and I'm using it deliberately. Let me explain why. First of all, as soon as you see that, many of you are hearing religion, but I'm not using the word religion, I'm using the word religio, but I want the associations with religion nevertheless to be there. Religio is one of the purported etymological origins of the word religion. Religere, which means to read back, which is importantly similar. This means to bind together. To bind together, to connect. So it obviously is pointing to this, but it carries with it many of these aspects, the primordiality, the fundamental framing of relevance realization, and all of this machinery. So when I invoke religio, I am basically invoking the right hand of this diagram. So religio is, in that sense, I'm using it in a spiritual sense. Okay, so the thing here, Paul van der Klee would probably say that, this is a word that fudges, spiritual, and I don't want to be fudging. I am trying to specify how I'm using this word in detail and in organization. Religio is I'm using it in a spiritual sense as the sense of a pre-egoic, ultimately to post-egoic binding that simultaneously grounds the self and its world. Now, I want to pick up on that and pick up on the evolving, involvement, caring, like all of this. And I want to read you a couple quotes from an article by Paulo Costa in a book called The Joys of Secularism. Right? He has a fantastic article there called A Secular Wonder. And he wants to try and explain what's going on in wonder. And think about wonder. Think about how it's pointing towards the insight, the sense of opening up, but also the connectedness, how perspectival and participatory, how it involves your caring, how it often can merge with awe and altered states and potentially higher states. So wonder is central, right? But notice how the machinery he uses to explain wonder. This is a quote. The very ordinary fact that things always matter, right? He puts it in quotes, in some way or other to us, and that we cannot help but be affected by things as if we were immersed in a sort of bubble of meaningfulness. Notice it's the relevance realization, how things matter to us. And he uses the word matter because it's that importance, that constitutive kind of relevance realization. And we're immersed in it. We're immersed in it. We're immersed in sort of a bubble of meaningfulness, or better, in an atmosphere of significance. An atmosphere of significance. An import, notice the word import is already here, that we do not create from scratch. We do not create it, but are absorbed by. The metaphor of the atmosphere should suggest not only the image of a global container, but also of a rhythm of breathing. Breathing, the compression and particularization, the generalization and the specialization, the assimilation and the accommodation, the breathing are the lifeblood of our spirit. The metaphor of the atmosphere should suggest not only the image of a global container, but also that of a rhythm of breathing and of a light refraction. It's doing relevance realization. It's refracting the light, structuring the intelligibility, to which a living being must, listen to this word, must attune or adjust herself. All the participatory knowledge. This is from somebody who's commenting on secularism. He goes on to point out there's a central consequence of what he calls a bubble of significance. This is another quote. The experience of having a world, here the Heidegger in here, has its roots not in a head-on and focused relationship with a clear-cut object. It is not something that we have as a focal object, something that we can, right, objectify with an I-it conceptualization. The experience of having a world has its roots not in a head-on and focused relationship with a clear-cut object, but in the emergence of a bubble of significance that for a sentient being plays the same role that is played by the atmosphere with regard to the earth. You participate in the atmosphere. You contribute to it, but you emerge from it, and you did not make it. It creates, that is, special conditions of life where existentially crucial distinctions between inside and outside are drawn. That primordial ground makes all the distinctions between the inner and the outer possible for us. The transjectivity is deeper than our subjectivity and our objectivity, because the constitution of subjectivity and objectivity require all of this machinery. He then goes on to argue that because we aren't aware of the atmosphere in a focal, objectified way, I mean as a perceptually focalized object, I don't mean as an object of thought, right? He then goes on to argue that the atmospheric nature of the bubble of significance means that we don't experience it as a focal object, but through non-focal states such as, and here's the point of his article, wonder and awe. Or I would add their opposites, which we'll talk about later, absurdity and horror. Right? So wonder is that state in which we become aware in a participatory and perspectival way, not in a focal way, but in a perspectival and participatory way, of the significance and our involvement and our indebtedness to and our participation from and our committedness to, right, the atmosphere of relevance realization. One is tempted here, and I'm worried here about being sacrilegious, so I'm using this analogously, please. But the analogy is meant to be a strong one also. Right? This atmosphere, you see what Costa's doing here? He's invoking, what St. Paul said, God is in whom we live and move and have our being. I'm not claiming that relevance realization is God. That's ridiculous. I'm not doing that. But what I'm saying is, right, wonder and awe, which are often directed towards things like God, are ways that Costa is arguing in which we disclose the relevance realization and its spiritual significance to us, right? The way in which we, within it, we live and move and have our being. Again, this is from a person who is trying to articulate a secular sense of spirituality. Now, somebody who is aligned with this, but I don't think is secular, is the masterful work by Robert Fuller on wonder. His book on wonder is just a fantastic book, and he also argues how central wonder is. Now, what's interesting, he does two things that align with this so well, and I highly recommend this book. He argues, because it's a book from emotion to spirituality, and what Fuller argues is that, of course, wonder is responsible for some of our deepest spiritual experiences, our deepest experiences of what I'm calling religio. But he does that by precisely explaining the fundamental functionality of things like wonder. See, wonder is basically in the being mode, where curiosity is in the having mode. In curiosity, right now, I'm using these terms in their prototypical senses. We use these terms in very slippery fashions. So I'm not claiming that every time we use the word wonder or every time we use the word curiosity, but I'm talking about the kind of wonder that can overlap very readily and prototypically with awe. And I'm talking about the kind of curiosity that overlaps prototypically with our solving our problems and our manipulating the world in a way that we find powerful and efficacious. See, and again, remember what I said. It's not that one mode is good and the other mode's bad, but you've got curiosity within the having mode, and that's great, right? Because curiosity is problem solving. It has a focal object. Curiosity is directed. What is that? What does that do? How does that work? Wonder is, it's non-focal. It's the opening up. It's the awe. It's the sense of, right, the atmosphere. It's the perspectival and participatory sense of, right? And what Fuller argues is, and he makes use of work like people like Fredrickson and others, that this emotion, like this, the point of wonder is, right, if curiosity, it gets you to focus in like on specific features of the world, specific objects, wonder tries to get you to participate in the gestalt, the whole. How does it all fit together? Awe pushes you towards an opening, an ongoing accommodation, a sense of the inexhaustibleness, the combinatorially explosive nature of reality, and the ongoing evolving adaptability of your relevance realization to that explosive potential within reality itself. That's what wonder does. Wonder isn't about solving a problem. Wonder is about remembering sati, your being, by putting you deeply in touch, notice the language, in touch with religio. Okay, now, that brings me to another aspect that overlaps with the primordiality, or what I'm calling the fundamentality, the fundamental framing. Right? But think about how wonder gives you something like the oath again. It gives you the sense of participating, emerging from, co-creating with the ongoing course of your world. Not as a story, though, but something you can talk about with a story, like we talk about evolution as a story, but it isn't itself a story. It's grounded in something deeper. So, wonder, awe. It's not about solving problems. Remember, the having mode is about solving problems. The being mode is about confronting a mystery. Okay, I'm going to take it that this has been now etched into your brain, and I am going to just, like I said, I'm going to rely on the word religio to invoke all of the right side and the fact that is dependent on the argument that came from the left side as well. Okay, so think about wonder, think about awe, and what we've been talking about, and this remembering of the being mode, which is so central to spirituality, right? So that's another aspect of this. Okay, so think about this as accommodation, that opening up, having to go, right? This is you, when I accommodate, I come to know something by how I am transformed in order to come into contact with it. And in my own, my self-knowing of how I've changed and the disclosure, my realization of that, what that is, are bound together. Like prototypically when you're in love with somebody, the oath. Okay. So this is accommodation, and it's in the being mode. You're remembering sati. And in the being mode, you're confronting a mystery. Do you remember, talked about Marcel's idea about how a mystery, right? And notice the machinery. Here's how I framed my problem. And then I realize there's a kind of insight that so initially there's an insight that, oh, that framing is itself problematic, and I move to a more encompassing frame, and oh no. And then what starts to happen is, I'm opening up. Right? I'm opening up, and my insight goes from a reframing to a transframing. Because I stop having insights about my focal problem, I start getting an insight not about just about the problem or the world. I also, remember the sensibility transcendence, I'm also getting an insight into the inadequacies of my style of framing, my way of framing. I'm getting a transframing happening. You get this trajectory of transframing. It doesn't stabilize, and that's the point. It can't land on a focal object. All it's disclosing in the trajectory of transframing is the machinery of religio. And yet you find that, like flow, you find that deeply meaningful to a point. If it's pushed too far, it becomes deeply meaningful in a negative sense of horror. Now, think about this. Okay? Think about how, right? And here's what we have to be really careful here. I want to talk about the mystery of religio. But I need to make a distinction here, and it's a distinction I've discussed before, but let's go over it very carefully. There's a distinction between something being a phenomenological mystery and it being something that I cannot theoretically explain. To equate them is to equivocate between propositional and perspectival knowing, for example, and we should not equivocate between them because they're not identical. So, for example, it is phenomenologically impossible for me to perspectivally know what it is like to be dead. Because whenever I try to conjure up a frame, oh, I'm in a dark room, but wait, I'm still there in the dark room. There's the here-ness and the now. Oh, well, then I'm nowhere. Well, then I'm just an empty. No matter what I do, I can't get a framing that has within it my own non-existence, perspectively. But that is not proof that I'm immortal. It is not proof that I've existed for all time. Of course not. That's ridiculous. That's a mistake. That's an equivocation. So when I'm talking about mystery, I'm not talking automatically. You need an additional argument. You need an additional argument to go from phenomenological mystery to the claim of theoretical inexplicability. They do not follow because they are not identical for the deep reason that propositional and perspectival knowing are not identical. That is an equivocation. So, I'm talking about a phenomenological mystery here. Well, what is it? What's at the core of religio? Well, the death example actually points to something more primordial, right? It points to the fact that I can never make a focal object of my framing my capacity for relevance realization. I mean perspectively. What I mean by that is whenever I am thinking, right, or doing anything, it's always framed. Because if I'm unframed, I'm facing combinatorial explosion, which is non-intelligible to me. So whatever I'm thinking of is inside the frame. But what is precisely not inside the frame is the framing process. So here's the frame, or here's the framed, even better, right? And here's the framing. And what's not in there is the framing. Or you say, oh, what I'll do is I'll do this. Haha, that was easy, John. Haha, John, I got you. That was easy. No, you didn't get me, because what's outside here still is what is framing that. You cannot have this in a part, right? You can't have it as a focal object. It is mysterious. It is phenomenologically mysterious. James pointed to this in a wonderful distinction between the I and the me. These are the aspects of you that you can bring into view. Well, who am I? Well, I'm John Vervaeke, and this is what I look like. Here's an image in my mind. And what's not there is whatever it is that's generating that name and that image. And then I go deeper and say, but here's the part of my, right, that was generating the part that was, and then I can never, and the pun again, right? I can never see the I. I'm always seeing by means of the I. It is phenomenologically mysterious too. But it doesn't mean that I'm unaware of it. I always have, to use older language from the course I always have a subsidiary awareness. I'm always aware through my I of my me. I'm always aware through my framing of my framed. I'm not completely out of touch with it. It is not inaccessible to me, but I cannot focalize it. I cannot make it a focal object. I cannot frame it, right? The machinery of relevance realization is, in that sense, deeply phenomenologically mysterious to me. Doesn't mean I can't talk about it theoretically. I've just been doing it. But it has a deep phenomenological mystery to me. The fact that it grounds and makes possible my subjectivity and the objectivity, where what I mean by that is things constellated into objects that we can make inferences about, etc., right? I can't use the grammar of subjects and objects, subjects and predicates, conceptual categories to talk about this in the sense of exemplifying it. I can use words to talk about it in the sense of pointing to it, but I can't produce it in subjective and objective categories precisely because the whole argument points towards its transjective nature. Again, that only makes it phenomenologically mysterious. It doesn't make it a theoretical inexplicability. You cannot confuse properties of your theory with properties of what your theory is about. If I have a theory of light, it itself, right, isn't light. If I have a theory of war, my theory isn't itself an instance of war. If I have a theory of gravity, my theory isn't itself generating gravity. My theory of vagueness doesn't itself have to be vague. In fact, my theory of vagueness should be clear. Okay? My theory doesn't have to exemplify what it's talking about. And there are cases where it cannot exemplify what it is talking about. But that doesn't mean I can't talk about what I'm talking about.
Okay. We back. Much to go over, fam. So he starts to outline the right side of relevance realization, what we could say the outputs of relevance realization. And he terms that religio.
Religio.
Yes. A pre-egoic binding that simultaneously grounds our beingness and the world.
Yeah. So I didn't catch the author's name, but Joys of Secularism.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And a secular wonder. So wonder is central to what matters, and matter in quotation mark, like actually like matter as well.
Matters to, yeah, and matter as well. You're right.
The bubble of meaningness.
Meaningfulness, yeah.
Meaningfulness. And bubble, okay, encapsulated, but a better way is the atmosphere of significance.
I love that. And I love the way that this guy says the very ordinary fact that things always matter is the wonder. Yeah. And we cannot help but relate as though everything is meaningful. We're immersed in, as you said, an atmosphere of significance.
Yeah, a rhythm of breathing.
Yes.
Because you're...
Assimilation and congregation. Breathing and light refraction.
Yeah.
A living being must attune itself to its environments through these methods, and we notice how we are absorbed by this atmosphere of significance. We assimilate and we congregate with it.
And as an agent of the atmosphere as well.
Yes. The experience of having a world has relation with a bubble of significance, such as that Earth has an atmosphere. We didn't create that atmosphere, but we interact with it.
And having the world is not a focal object, but the interaction we're having.
It's like I have a personality, but I am not the personality. Yeah. Well, who is the who that has the personality? Then if you can't list what you are without any descriptions, without any words or ideas or concepts, yet you can still feel this sense of beingness. Who is that? Well, this is where we get transsubjective. It's beyond description.
Deeper than the subject or object.
Yeah. This is the Tao.
So wonder, the opposite of wonder is absurdity. The opposite of awe is horror. And that's interesting because when we see horrible things, we say that's awful. Oddly enough. Oh, it's awful. Well, you think awful would be like full of awe, right? But like it's the inverse negative form when,
yes.
Awful is horrible.
Yes. Yeah. Awe can be both, it's like trying to describe God and you hear descriptions like terrifyingly beautiful in the same sentence, and that gives you an impression of it's so overwhelming. It can be terrifying. It can also be overwhelmingly beautiful. And the amount of beauty, all of that information at once is almost shakes you to the core. It disrupts your
Yeah.
normal sense of reality. So this, how relevance realization and the sense of wonder creates a primordial ground that grants us a sense of inside and outside.
Yeah.
That's the transjectivity, the pre-objective, pre-subjective, wonder and awe versus absurdity and horror. Wonder is that state in which we become aware of the significance of our involvement, commitment to the atmosphere of relevance realization.
Before we go into that, there's something I wrote down that's we are within and participating in the atmosphere of significance.
Yes.
So not only are we
Yes.
just in it, but we are also participating in it. So
We're
that
interacting with
introduces,
it.
yeah. It introduces the having mode and being mode as well. Like
That's right.
It's both in this way. It's like, you have the atmosphere, or you're being in the atmosphere, but you're also
It's something that you have a having relationship with as well.
and it has you too.
And it has you too. And so Acosta, now we get to this gentleman who is invoking. That's right. He was the
Fuller.
guy that wrote.
I think it's Fuller wrote
Yeah, so Acosta wrote The Joys of Secularism.
That's
And
Acosta.
Acosta was invoking the spiritual way we live within, move, and have our being in a secular sense of
Yeah.
spirituality.
Yeah.
And this is what he's invoking, the secular sense of spirituality. And it has very religious language, the way we live within it, like you were saying with atmosphere, we move within it and have our being within it. So now we get to Robert Fuller, who wrote On Wonder. And
argues wonder is responsible for what Vervaeke's calling religio,
yes, for our deepest experiences.
by explaining the functioning of wonder.
Wonder is definitely being mode, and it opens with awe. And this isn't.
And it's also scaling up as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And curiosity is associated with having mode. It can sometimes be being mode. Vervaeke makes this point, but very often is with the having mode. And so curiosity overlaps with problem solving. But wonder is not going into particularization like problem solving, curiosity mode is, having mode is.
Yeah.
Wonder is opening up.
Yeah. Whereas the curiosity is the manipulation of the having mode. And so this opening up, this scaling up, this sati, this remembering, like re-becoming a member of.
Yes, the deep sense of remembering by being in touch with reality in religio. And so this binding together. So the point of wonder is to participate in the gestalt, into the larger whole.
Yes, and that's where the scaling up is. The gestalt,
Yes.
You scale up into the gestalt, and you scale down into the individual
Details
detail
and particulars.
pieces. Yeah.
Yes. So this is so we're tapping into with wonder the inexhaustibleness and the ongoing, and we're partaking in an ongoing adaptability of our relevance realization to that explosive sense of wide open reality.
In a non-narrative way as well. You're participating in this world, but not in a narrative story.
It's your so the wonder gives us the sense of da'ath, which is a sense of co-creating with somebody else or with the world. So it's not, so we can talk about it as kind of like as a story, but it's not a story. It can be talked about in that way, but it's something deeper.
Yeah. So religio comes from the right side of this chart, the products, but it's dependent on the inputs, the input side as well. So it's coming from one, but also dependent on the other.
And it's always going both ways, and he pointed that out for us too, to remember that these things are always recursive. So we have awe and wonder, and in awe we have this accommodation.
Yeah, so the being mode and accommodation are
bound together. Yes, the realization is bound together in this being mode with the sati, the remembering, and that sense of mystery is a phenomenological mystery that Vervaeke is trying to outline here.
Yeah, so he explained opening of reframing
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So, you have your frame,
Yep. You frame a
and then
problem.
you move out,
You have an insight, and then you have a new frame.
and then you do it again. You have new
Yes.
frame. Well, so before you have the insight, you create a frame, and then create a
First
frame
frame.
around it, and then another frame, and
Yeah.
then you have an insight that connects all the frames, that transcends these frames.
Yes.
It's so this transcending of framings is the machinery of religio.
Yes, this is awe. This is
Yeah.
insights piling upon themselves. So the framed problem, and then you have like an initial insight, you get a more encompassing frame, and then you get a greater opening up, a new frame where the insight is not just about the problem. Now the insight is also about one's own initial
Yeah.
previous misframing.
Yeah.
So now
Sure.
you're brought into the dance.
So now
You're seeing, oh, I was wrong here.
yeah, your most
You know?
external framing that you've got right now can then connect back to your previous framing and expand it
Yeah.
and better inform your mistakes, if you will.
So this is the trajectory of trans framing.
Yes.
And this is why we find flow so deeply meaningful, because it's a cascade of insights. It's a cascade of awe and wondrous connections with reality and with a new understanding of yourself as you reframe and refit
And
to
actually,
reality.
like, so this is an anecdotal personal experience, but I won't say I'm an expert at the functionality and what is flow state, but I am an expert at getting into it with groups of people through the band, the
Through music,
jam
sure.
improv band that I have. That like we specifically do a lot of off the cuff improv stuff where everybody listens. You have to problem solve. You have to see the whole thing at once, but you also have to zoom into the particulars. Like what key are we going? Okay, what movement are you doing? Okay, what chord pattern are we using for this? Now there's a shift, putting it all together, and it puts you in that flow state, and it feels like a cascade. Like literally, it feels like it rushes over you. It's just like like a waterfall.
Yes.
So it's just interesting that word. It's cascade. It literally feels like that,
Like a
like
cascade.
constantly
That's a great
flowing
metaphor
and
he's using there.
falling down, and
Yeah.
and not falling down in a bad way, but like coming down from on high gracefully and
Yeah, and it's
breaking
crazy
up
because
into
in
this
those
mist.
moments, you're able to keep track of everything that everyone's doing in a broad sense, but you're also able to pick up on particulars.
And also what
effortlessly.
you're doing too.
And
So what they're doing and what you're
you're actually
doing.
watching yourself respond to this little thing that someone else
Yeah.
did that was like, oh, that's really clever what he just did there. Now we're playing off it.
In multiple ways, you're scaling up and scaling down at the
Yes.
same time. So it's like, okay, well, understanding the whole song or where we're going, you would call that the scaling up gestalt end. Understanding the components of what key you're in, what are the chord movements that we're using, basic rule sets to kind of know where you're going. Like like if you play blues, it's a 1-4-5, right? But there's also the scaling up and out of what is everybody's doing, and then the scaling down into what am I doing, or specifically what is another person doing, while it's all happening at the same time. So you have multiple non-dual
Recursive loops
little
happening.
figure eights
Yeah.
happening with each other over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
basically. So cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting feeling, and I do it through music. Other people, do it through
Basketball.
sport or conversation or
anything, yeah.
other things. I just happen to be a musician, so that,
Yeah, and it helps, and so to be able to cause flow state to occur, there's different ways to help trigger it, and playing at the very edge of your ability. So you guys are playing in improv territory.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what's going to happen next. You're playing at the edge of your ability. It's challenging to do that, but you guys are all technically adept. You guys are all talented with your instruments. You've been playing for a long time, so as long as you have the skill set and then you go to do something that is at the edge of your ability, you are likely to induce a flow state, especially if everyone is open to operating in that space
Yes.
together in a team kind of environment with preset rules and ideas around it. So with basketball, you have the court, everyone has their own position, there's different rules and things that everyone has to abide by, but within
constraints give you the
that
freedom.
arena, but within that arena, the agents have free reign.
Yeah.
And you will see somebody like Michael Jordan go into a flow state and score 50 points in a playoff game because the conditions are set up just right, and he also is practiced at cultivating
well,
that
you
state.
know, if we didn't have
And with his teammates, so the no-look passes are happening,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
the intuitions are all happening together.
And if we didn't have constraints, like say, like in music or sports, and it was just like, so particularly with music, if
It
you're
would be
jamming,
combinatorial explosion.
and also it'd just be a bunch of like, say, with
Noise.
music, noise, noodling.
Noise. That's
There's
what I mean,
nobody
yeah.
listening. So
It's
it's,
combinatorial explosion.
so
Basically. It's chaos.
our first constraint is, okay, what key are we in?
Yeah.
And I have.
And there's a general
Yeah.
speed that you all are
Yeah.
playing according to at
Yeah,
the same time.
and
right?
well, so what we do is pick a key, pick a style. So like
Yeah,
somebody
okay.
will, somebody like the drummer will start playing something. It's like, okay, I guess we're playing that kind of rhythm, and then we'll look around, and then somebody will start playing something. Oh, what key are you in? Okay, you're in an A minor. All right, that's one. Okay, we'll call that one. Now, while we're moving through, I'll move to something. I'd be like, okay, well, we're in the one. Let's go to the three, and then the two, and so it's like those are the next constraints, and then by the time we go through a set progression back and forth once, now we can reliably go back and forth, and then when we make a change to completely change the whole thing, we still have the constraints of the previous to then get back to and get back into it. And that gives us all the freedom in the world to do whatever we want.
Yes.
But if there was no rules, like if we didn't have the same language that is what key are you in,
Yeah.
what chords are you going to? I use numbers because like trying to like figure out whatever key I'm in, whether it's major and minor, and then say that while I'm playing is just too much. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
But it's like an intuitive knowing, okay, well, this phrase is about to end, so we are going to wind this thing up together at this part.
Another
We're going to change
constraints,
here.
4s, 8s, 12s, 16s, like how many times through the stanza or how many measures.
Yeah. And someone might do something surprising.
Yeah.
They
But
might change it on you, and that will be a really cool change too. And
So
everyone will
that's-
adapt and flow with it. So when we flow, we find it deeply meaningful. It's the most meaningful thing that we experience.
So that's the insights within the opening of framing, and now
Now we're noticing also how it's impossible to perspectively have a framing of one's own death or non-existence.
which you can't, like you can't have the perspective of being dead.
That's right. So the I and the me are aspects that we can bring into view, but whatever generates that sense of I or that sense of me, we can't see it. You can't see the I, but yet we see by means of the I. Like
Yes.
I'm always aware of the I through the sense of me, knowing that I have an I. So it's from frame to frame. But relevance realization is what grounds us and makes possible that objectivity and subjectivity in the first place. So there is a deeper ground that we can experientially know, but we can't intellectually know or name it.
Yeah.
And Vervaeke is,
And you can't make a framing.
shies
You
away
can't make
from
a
calling
framing
relevance
process.
realization God, but I think you're getting pretty close to what people are talking about
Well, so and
when they say the term or the word God.
you cannot make a framing process within this mystery.
Within the perspectival
Yeah.
knowing sense.
Yeah,
of it.
because you make a frame and then you're like, oh well, I got a frame. Oh well, I got a frame around it, and then what's the next frame around that? And we know where that leads.
Yeah. Only in the participatory and the procedural can we experience it. In the being mode, we can't experience transjectivity or transcendence in the personal having mode, but we can through the being mode.
And so when it comes to relevance realization, we can only point to it. We can't produce it.
That's right.
Like you can't necessarily teach a baby and teach it how to realize its toes. Now, mind you can point to it, and you can point to their toes, and you can chew on their little toes, and you can point to your toes and wiggle your toes, and that through mirror neurons, it's going to wiggle
and
its
slowly
toes.
it's going to start to form its relevance
But
realization.
you can't just be like, okay, your toes are relevant. They help you walk. They're they're
It's all you're doing is going
like,
to the baby, and whatever
but
motions or
eventually,
anything you do, it's
the baby, before it learns to speak, realize the relevance of its toes.
Yeah.
First off, as something it can put in its mouth to figure out and play with and mess with and but then eventually, these little things.
you can play with them. Okay, I can move them.
I can push off the carpet with them, and now I can scoot, and I can grab something.
Yeah.
And all before all the rest.
So what's crazy is he goes into this part where he says we can't use conceptual categories to talk about it.
Yeah.
So we can't confuse the properties of any theory with the theory itself.
Yeah, like the theory of light is not light.
No, the theory of gravity has no weight. Gravity, it doesn't create gravity, you know. What did he say? A theory of vagueness would actually still have to be clear, you know?
Yeah, yeah, right.
I think he says, I don't know if he said that yet or he says that next, but
That's hilarious, though.
it's a really good point
that's good.
that really helps put this in perspective.
Yeah.
It's because people are going to confuse what he's saying with his theory, that the properties of the theory with the theory itself, and we're not trying to equivocate here.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, for the last bit.
Last little chunk here, guys. We're jumping back in.
My theory doesn't have to exemplify what it's talking about. And there are cases where it cannot exemplify what it is talking about. But that doesn't mean I can't talk about what I'm talking about. It has to be that I have to understand the limitations that are given by the differences between the kinds of knowing, and also the ways in which I can and cannot bridge between these kinds of knowing. So there's something deeply phenomenologically mysterious. And in that mystery, the mystery opens up an affordance of a trajectory of transframing that allows us to participate in, perspectively, a kind of wonder and awe of religio. We can get into something very much like a transjective trajectory flow state, in which we are basically celebrating in flow our participation in religio. And we do this, I would argue, for the very good reason that to make significant, to reflect upon, to celebrate and enact religio is to fundamentally enhance our agency, the disclosure of the world, and our connectedness to it. And what else could be more valuable to us? What else could be more valuable to us? So, I think there is now a major objection that could be leveled against the argument that I am building. And I take this objection very seriously. This is the argument that, yes, John, I will grant you, with Costa, there's all kinds of wonderful, spiritual, meaningful things on this side, and you're capturing a lot about mystery and self-transcendence, and also the capacity, the negative capacity of, bullshitting ourselves and reciprocal narrowing and falling into, right, despair and addiction. And you're capturing all of that. I'll grant you all of that. Perhaps you're not, but just for the sake of the argument, so I'm granting you all of that. But there's still something missing that I think is central to how I use the word spirituality, and what I would what's missing from religio that's found in religion is to confront the sacred. I'm trying to use a term as neutral as possible here, because it's unclear, I think, if we should apply the term divinity, for example, to the Buddhist notion of shunyata or the Taoist notion of the Tao. I don't think calling it divine is a plausible interpretation. Whereas God is divine, I don't think you should call the Tao divine. But the Tao is clearly sacred in an important way. And I think for many versions of Buddhism, the shunyata has a kind of important kind of sacredness. So, the thing here is, there's two things we have to talk about. And we have to talk about them carefully, but keep them distinct, but also show how they're connected. So, The sacred is typically when we want some account of the metaphysics of what grounds our experience of sacredness. So this is basically a metaphysical proposal. A standard Western proposal, although I've already given you an indication that it's not universal, it's not in things like Buddhism or Taoism, is that the sacredness is grounded, the metaphysical proposal is grounded in being supernatural in some sense. And of course, that's, again, a very loaded term. I'm going to use it in the way I've argued for in this video series, right? Something that is historically constructed, running through people like Aquinas and beyond. Okay, so this is the metaphysical proposal, and then you ultimately have a psycho-existential proposal over here, which is right. Well, this is what it's like to experience sacredness. This distinction comes to the fore, for example, historically, and there's so many people, right? I wish I could talk about more. I need 3 more series, but if I tried to run this for 150 episodes, my crew would kill me, and then there'd be a tragedy. They'd end up in jail. It'd just be a mess. So I'm going to stick to the 50, right? But pulling these apart, you find this, of course, prototypically in the work of Schleiermacher, where he sort of puts aside this proposal because it's coming into serious disrepute because of the advent of the scientific revolution, and he shifts towards, but what's the psychological existential experience of sacredness? And his proposal that it's the experience of sort of absolute dependence, and coupled, I would argue, with things like wonder and awe. But that distinction, right, came to the fore in work by Schleiermacher. And you can see a lot of theological debate, I would argue. I can't do the argument here, but you can see a lot of theological debate as the debate between a side that wants to emphasize sacredness and a side that wants to emphasize the sacred. So, I want to talk about this, but I want to talk about this in a way that reflects back on that. Why do I start here? I start here because, of course, I've argued that religio is exactly a psycho-existential. Very powerfully read this, though. Well, this has to do with modal, right? With your, like the being mode. It has to do with your modal existence. It has to do with transjectivity. It has to do with primordiality. You have to read this in a deeply Heideggerian sense, right? But that's what I mean. And psycho meaning, right, having to do with your cognitive processing, all the kinds of knowing, right? Your embodiment, your embeddedness. So reading psychological in also a very comprehensive way. But I'm clearly arguing that religio is on here. So first of all, I should start here because that's where I'm starting from. And I want to talk about sacredness as within a psycho-existential sense. And then if I can, since I've already done this, right, ground this in RR, relevance realization, then I'm going to make proposals about what this tells us about the kinds of constraints that are available to us in our metaphysical proposal. And I'm going to propose an alternative to this, which I imagine will be controversial, but I hope that the controversy will be constructive rather than merely adversarial. All right, so I'm going to start here. I'm trying to be honest with you. I'm trying to be clear about what I'm trying to do. I don't want to be shuffling any cards from the bottom of the deck here, right? I'm trying to be as upfront as I possibly can be. Of course, I'm not unbiased or any kind of magical claim like that, but I'm trying my best to put the machinery that I'm aware of using and that I'm deliberately putting into play out front so that we can talk about this as clearly and as honestly as possible. Okay. So let's talk about sacredness as a psycho-existential thing. And where I want to start, right, is in the machinery of the agent-arena relationship. And I want to bring back the work of Geertz, and we talked about the work of Brian Walsh, and we talked about this when we talked about domicide. and domicide as the loss of something. And this points to a very central feature of sacredness that is so central that it's so backgrounded that we can, I think, inappropriately trivialize it. But remember remember how disastrous domicide is. Remember what happens if you actually experience domicide. If I fling you into another culture and you experience deep culture shock, or I isolate you in solitary confinement, okay? So that deep loneliness, that deep homesickness, that deep cultural shock, that's domicide. And so part of sacredness, Geertz argues, right? Part of sacredness is to home the world. I understand why he puts it, but it's not homing the world, it's homing us and the world together, right? The world, we are homed into the world and the world homes around us, very much like Costa's atmospheric bubble. So this is the idea that one of the functions of sacredness is what Geertz calls a meta-meaning function. Now he talks about this in his work on religion, but he's definitely in the Schleiermacher side of things. So this is not appropriate for me to do it this way. And this is something that fits in with our argument very well. Geertz argues, and be careful here because people jump. He argues that religion isn't a system of meaning. Oh, no. Okay, wait. He thinks it's a system of meta-meaning. Right? So whatever distinct meaning systems we make, here's a legal system, here's a moral system, here's a fashion system, right? Here's an entertainment system. We have all these meaning systems, but notice the argument that we've already made. Those are all dependent on the primordiality of the transjective relationship between the agent of the arena. If that relationship doesn't hold, none of those other systems can work, which is why if you go to another culture and you don't go through the participatory transformation, right? If you don't, and you're just experiencing culture shock, domicide, the agent-arena relationship isn't in place, then none of those other meaning systems can work for you. They'll be absurd. They won't make sense. That's what he means by it being a meta-meaning system. What it does, he argued that religion, I would argue what the experience of sacredness is, because, again, the word religion fudges between, are we talking about the Schleiermachian sense, or are we talking about sort of the metaphysical referent? Okay, so remember, I'm pulling these apart to try and avoid that confusion. So, but what Geertz is talking about here is, right, that if you don't have that none of your individual meaning systems work. And religion, in the sense of the experience, the cultural and individual experience of sacredness, is what gives us the meta-meaning system that protects us from domicide. It protects us from the horrors and the absurdities of domicide. So one of the functions of sacredness, right, is the meta-meaning process of homing us against horror. Where horror would be to be overwhelmed by loneliness, it would be overwhelmed by homesickness, cultural shock, and a tremendous sense of alienation, absurdity, and anxiety. Okay? Now that's important. I think that's a very important function of sacredness. What we do when we go into a sacred setting is we play with we have psychotechnologies, and I'll come back and give a definition of a clear definition as we work that out of a psychotechnology. But we have psychotechnologies that allow us to do this serious play, right, with sacredness, so that we are constantly being homed against horror. And of course, many of you are aware of all the research showing that people that belong to religious communities or spiritual pathways are much more resilient in the face of the tragedies and horrors of life. That's a reliable finding. One of the ways in which, you have to seriously consider the other costs, but one of the ways in which you can improve your capacity to make your way through the world is to be committed to a spiritual community and a spiritual path. Presumably it also has a history behind it. It has institutions, etc., and that would make it more prototypically like a religion. Again, you know me by now. I'm not advocating for a nostalgic return to religion. I'm trying to point out, though, the functionality. So, worldview attunement, homing us against horror. Remember, Costa even used the word attune in there. That's definitely a function of the sacred. Now, here's where I want to criticize Geertz. I think that while this is definitely an important part of, sorry, I slipped there. I should have said a function of sacredness. I made a mistake. This is definitely a function of sacredness. But I think that there is a mistake if we think that sacredness can be reduced to or identified solely with the machinery of worldview attunement and homing us against horror. It's very plausible to me that this is a necessary feature of sacredness, but I do not think it is a sufficient feature. So if we go back to Hellenistic domicide, if you remember, we talked about the different kinds of responses. There was syncretism, and then there was things like Stoicism and the remembering of the being mode. But there was also Gnosticism. And Gnosticism keeps reverberating, right? It keeps reverberating through everything we're doing here. And Gnosticism, of course, is a way of trying to awaken us to the primordiality of, and the mystery, in some important sense, of religio. That's definitely what's going on. But there's something interesting about the Gnostics. And that's the element that Dekana emphasized, that the trajectory of transframing is ultimately understood as transgressive. It's trying to, right, overturn the grammar of a worldview. It is transgressive in a deep, deep sense. And I think that that points towards something else that the sacred does for us, and right? And this goes towards the work of Otto, deeply influenced by Kant. I hope you see how, in a way, my work is deeply influenced by Kant, also by Hegel. But Otto, in his book, which is translated The Idea of the Holy, very bad translation. Many people argue a better translation would be something like The Experience of the Numinous. Because Otto's argument is precisely this notion has become very clouded for us. Okay? It is plausibly related to notions of wholeness and completeness. There's probably connections to words like health, which people wouldn't automatically think of, right? But we know that people typically think about this connected now in terms of a moral term or righteousness, right? But this association says what something else is going on here, right? Again, the etymologies are contested. Of course, with a word like that. We know that this is also weirdly associated with this, and I mentioned this before, glory. The glory of God, which is the predicate most often applied to him in the Old Testament. And that's not a moral term. So what we've got to get to is, what's going on here in this experience of the holy? And Otto created this term, the numinous, picked up, of course, by Jung, right, to describe what the original, the primordial experience of the numinous is before all of these, but what this is most pointing towards. A little bit of this, not so much this, right? What the numinous is the fundamental experience. And here's what I'm going to talk about next time, that the experience of the numinous is ultimately to experience the transgressive side of the sacredness, how it opens us up in wonder and awe and even takes us to the horizon of horror. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. rough, 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 rough.
So, understanding the limitations of the different kinds of knowing.
Yes, and how we can and can't bridge between.
Yeah. What is that?
So mystery opens up an affordance for perspectival wonder and awe experiences. We can get into a transjective trajectory, and we can experience flow in religious practice in which we celebrate and enact the religio. Why enacting, and this helps us understand why enacting the religio, the binding, is good for us.
Yeah.
What's missing that he points out is a clear way to confront the sacred.
Yeah, so religion confronts the sacred, whereas religio, not so sure. So that's why we're going into this and mussing about with it. And religio, as you said before, was tied into relevance realization. So what does this tell us about the sacred? So there's the sacred, which is the metaphysical proposal, the supernatural. And then there's sacredness, which is the modal and the psycho-existential proposal.
Yes, so the cognitive processing that's happening is the psycho side. The existential is being mode. What's it like to actually experience sacredness is what this side is focused on. And there's a big debate. It's a theological debate. Which should we focus on? The sacred and the supernatural sense of the sacred, like just believe? Or should we focus on the sacredness side, which is what it's like to have this experience?
Or can we go one further and
this is where we find relevance realization
use
playing through
religio, which is of sacredness, to tell us about the sacred. So using this psycho-existential side to inform us on the more metaphysical, propositional, supernatural end.
Well said.
Demystifying the mist within the valley, if you will.
Dig it. So we have sacredness on one side, which homes us, and it actually homes the world and us together. So it's like the world wraps around us in a home kind of way.
I like that. Yeah, because I thought he was saying honing, but then homing makes a lot more sense.
Homing, yeah.
Home the world and us together to deal with domicide.
Yes,
the horror of losing your home, because it's not just actually just losing your home.
No, it can be a sense of deep loneliness, meaninglessness.
Losing your community. Well,
yes, cultural shock or losing touch with your community.
I don't hang out in my favorite town anymore because, it's not that I left, it's they just left. It used to be a cool town, but they just left, and that's that domicide of feeling like you don't got a home with the people that you once had before. That really
the sacredness that used to bind everyone together in a communal way has depreciated, and there's a lot of signaling of virtue rather than the exercising of virtue in our world today. It's a lot of people have been feeling this. I mean, you see it in the intensification of the tribalism in our country, the extreme takes from the left and the right now, and the extreme judgments and stereotyping of the other side with super overgeneralizations that are often very cruel, and they don't take account for the great variety between different individuals, even within the same group.
So what would you call self-inflicted domicide? Because you got suicide when you kill yourself. What is it when you burn down your own home?
Wow.
What's the term for that?
Domicide, isn't it?
Well, sure. Like the constant othering of other people, and then drinking the Kool-Aid, and just because so-and-so thinks a certain way or voted for a certain person, well, now you're killing your home because they were your friends, your family, your community. You're doing it to yourself.
Yeah, there's a healthy side to our communalism, to the way that we like to try and come together in tribes, but you can see where it turns on itself.
So what Gertz is saying is, so religion is a set of meta-meaning, what would you call it?
A meta-meaningful. He's saying one of the functions of the sacred is that it's meta-meaningful. So religion is like a system of meta-meaning. And you have all different kinds of of systems that we utilize. Entertainment system was one example that he gave. He gave example of a bunch of different systems, but there's actually a meta thing that underlies all of that makes our individual interaction with systems possible.
The transjective relationship of agent arena.
That's right. Yes, it's all dependent on that transjective relationship between our agent and the arena that we're involved in.
So sacredness, homing us against the horrors of domicide through a set of psychotechnologies.
Yes, and this is homing us against, and when we say domicide, once again, we're talking about that sense of alienation, absurdity, and anxiety. Those are three great adjectives to describe the experience of domicide. And so many of us are experiencing this right now today. No matter what side of the spectrum you're on, we're experiencing that alienation, absurdity, and anxiety.
So there's the worldview attunement that is related to these sets of psychotechnologies that help you attenuate your worldview. I won't say necessarily like change or alter, but attenuate it.
Yes, in a way that is meaningful. And we do find, there's a reliable finding in many studies that the religio, or religious practice for people, does help protect them against the alienation, absurdity, and anxiety of life.
But sacredness cannot be fully explained just by worldview attunement.
That's right. Yeah, criticisms of Gertz that Vervaeke brings up, saying that, okay, this is all, it's plausible that these are necessary features, but this is not a sufficient list. And he points out how Gnosticism was trying to awaken us to mystery and the primordiality of the sacred, the fundamentality of the sacred. And it's also trying to overturn the grammar of a worldview in a transgressive sense. So we now get to Otto and his writing on the experience of the numinous, pointing out let's work on the word numinous rather than holy, because holy is kind of like a feature list of things that come from a more fundamental
because when you're talking about holy, are you talking about health? Are you talking about as a whole? Are you talking about the moral righteousness
or the glory of God?
Glory of God, or like, are you talking about Swiss cheese?
Right. And well, when we were talking about the word awe, we were noticing that it has two sides. It's got this beautiful, enlivening, revitalizing sense of it that's very uplifting and gives you a sense of oneness and all this beautiful stuff.
And then you've got the awe of when you see when you look at a absolutely beautiful mushroom cloud from a nuclear explosion, you go,
oh my God. That's awesome in a terrifying way.
Yeah, well, what was it, Gladriel from Lord of the Rings, when she was, going on her spiel, like, one of the things is she referred to herself as awful.
Yeah.
I don't think they did it in the movie, but in the books I remember seeing it as awful. And it was like, well, she's the most beautiful, but how can she be awful? Well, her might leaves you in awe, but is also terrible. Terrible was the word she used as well. That's what it was. It was terrible, which leads to awful, which leaves you in awe.
Reminds again of the Old Testament God.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
Yeah. Now, I wouldn't call God awful.
No, but it definitely had a terrifying side to it. Especially in
we are awful when we realize the righteousness of God coming down on us and judging us. We're full of awe, going, "Oh no!"
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And like you said with the mushroom cloud, a storm can be beautiful but terrifying at once. And so the numinous,
the numinous, to
describe that primordial experience that is fundamentally transgressive.
And I guess we'll talk more on the numinous because he didn't go super deep. I'm glad he didn't, because I'm running. I need to get a new notebook. I got some left, but
I'm getting low on this one too, man.
Been changing my note style, which seems to work a lot better for my weird, chaotic brain.
Following the diagrams that he puts up on the board is really helpful, and I picked that up from you, and I was doing a lot more of that today, and it's been helping me too.
I just need bigger paper so I can write on the margins all the stuff he's talking about.
I know, right? Same, dude. I know. I mean, this is wild. Like, what is happening here? You can't even see that.
Yeah.
It's wildness.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say about it.
You can't see that either. Look, white paper. We're not actually taking notes.
Let me see that. Yours looks freaking awesome. This is even. Let's get down with the wild. How are we looking?
Like it's a bunch of scribbles from a serial killer in prison.
At least Vervaeke's handwriting is about on level with our own. So
Yeah, I
I'm
was about to
okay.
say he's got some bad handwriting. I have to like zoom in on my phone, and I'm like, is that an L? Is that an R? Is that an TION? What is that?
I like that whoever helped him produce the series did a good job of any words that you're really too small to put it up on the screen for a second.
Yeah,
most of the time.
yeah.
Problem formulation or whatever the term is.
But
That was an amazing episode, and it's just going to get deeper from here, guys. Now we're diving into the spiritual end of things, and what Vervaeke's doing is he's not because he's a strict secularist and that he has a particular issue with religion so much as it might seem. Like what he's literally trying to do is come up with a secular explanation for the sense of the sacred that we have, arguments for enriching this capacity within ourselves in a secular frame so that we can continue to remarry science and spirituality once again.
well, just making just preaching propositions of faith at people isn't going to help
Get past
anybody.
just supernatural claims of you just have to believe, have faith.
Yeah,
this is
well-
a misunderstanding of the word faith. First off, in ancient
Yeah.
Hebrew, it means faithfulness
Yeah.
as to a partner or a way of being. And the original followers of Christ were followers of the way.
Yeah, and I would say this
We
idea
meet a
of,
lot of Christians that aren't good followers of the way. It's
I would say this idea of just have faith is a very Lutheran view of we are scum, just open yourself up and have faith, and maybe you'll be lucky enough for God to lower himself into you, a hollow, despicable vessel.
yeah, and it's not supposed to be
Yeah,
that. It's not
you
supposed
know.
to be that. It just means that we are not perfect and we will fall short sometimes. We will miss the mark sometimes.
Yeah.
But what we have to contrast that with is that this, in religious terms, this thing that people call God, at least in the Hebrew religions, is something that also is full of infinite merciful love.
Sure.
Ahava Hesed.
Well, so with faith too, so there's faithfulness,
Infinite forgiveness.
but then there's also, so faith, say like in like the Christian sense, faith, well, actually in any sense, faith has a component of doubt, and keep going even though you have the kernel of doubt.
Right. Yeah.
So it's you can't really necessarily have like, oh, well, you got faith in the most reliable thing and you can see that it's reliable. That's not faith. That's just knowing that it's reliable. Faith is like, I have faith in my little crappy car that it's going to get me to the next city before it runs out of gas.
Yeah,
I have faith in you, little car. You can do it. Let's do it together. I know that's a little bit of a stupid example, but still, like, faith has
It's
a
more
component of
participatory.
doubt. Like, I had faith in the fact that, like when you're like, hey, we need to do this podcast. I had faith in the beginning that it's like, okay, well, I'll definitely get something out of it. I might not. It might just be a drudge. It might be whatever, but I had faith. I have faith in you and the fact that you're not going to lead me astray in this. So it's like, okay, got my little bit of doubt, but we're gonna push through, and I'm glad I did because here we are doing the thing, learning
Awesome.
the things, making my brain hurt. Well, it's brain hurt, but in the exercise end. So and I
Yes.
have faith I'll get a little bit smarter after this. I have some doubts though because I'm an idiot in a lot of ways.
We all are, guys. We all got our gifts and our strengths, and we all have our weaknesses, and we're here to help fill those gaps for each other. That's why we're all so different. It's beautiful the way that we can fit together and help each other pick off where we left off. That's it.
And we can home ourselves. I like that.
We can home ourselves.
I like how he's turned it into a verb.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not Vervaeke turned it into a verb, but
and that
whatever.
reality
but
will home itself around us too when we engage with it in this way.
yeah, and it's
beautiful.
funny. We do that even with like inanimate objects.
Yeah.
This little thing. This is your home now.
Yeah, we do, don't
It's
we?
like we home things.
Yeah.
We home
There's some
little
kind of
homeless
Russian doll
kittens, yeah.
happening.
Yeah, it's,
Russian doll thing happening with the cosmos here.
Yeah.
And there is something ultimately that does transcend us, and it's an impossible mystery. And no matter how far we travel, we're never going to get to the end of solving that mystery because it's a phenomenological mystery.
It can't be said,
It
stated.
can only
but
be
it can only,
experienced and danced with.
and pointed
grown
at,
with,
and
yeah.
dance around it.
Because it's like it's
point
on an
at it.
infinite growth trajectory. So that transcendence trajectory that we're on is what a profound thing. What a beautiful thing that we get to be involved in it. And I love this idea. It's not just mere belief, faith in the supernatural. It's a faithfulness to a higher ideal. And when I brought up that idea that this thing that we're calling God is supposed to be infinitely forgiving, we're giving ourselves a transcendent idea of love with statements like that, so that we understand that there's infinite room to grow more loving for us as human beings, because there's this example that is ultimately transcendent that we'll never finish getting to, but we're always going to get better at loving the closer that we get to this unconditional nature of love that seems to be fundamental to our universe.
In my mind, perfection isn't the goal. It's not perfection, but well, transcendence is the word that we've been using a lot, but it's making better. You can't make it perfect, but you can always make it a little better.
Yeah, and it's like communing with reality seems part of the point.
Yeah.
You know, engaging with and coming into that communal, serious play with sacredness seems to be the greatest guard against the anxiety, the absurdity, the alienation of our lives.
Yeah.
Especially, particularly in times like this where the experience of domicide is so far and wide.
Yeah.
Well, we love you guys. This has been an awesome episode, and look forward to next episode, because it's just going to get better from here. And we're on the downhill slope now. We only have 16 episodes left.
Yeah, I'm gonna need a new thing, 'cause I started out this notebook on episode 20, and let's see, I've got, oh goodness, so that's 20 to 33. That's 13.
I'm getting more.
I'm gonna need
more notebooks out of this lecture series than any classes that I took in college. That is
yeah. Well, there's a reason why I didn't go to institutionalized education, because it's just like,
it can be pretty hit or miss nowadays. You'll sometimes luck out with really good professors, and I did. And I highly recommend you guys check out your local community colleges. Sometimes they're going to be much better than you think. Oftentimes they're not quite as taken over by nefarious interests either, and the professors have a little bit more freedom and leeway. I met a couple of amazing professors at my local community college, and I think that I got a better experience there than I would have at one of our closer local universities.
So you're trying to say that there's less Gnostic cultists out there in the community college?
To a degree, and now the infestation is spreading quickly, but...
Yeah, I've stopped using the W word. I've started calling them Gnostic cultists, because that's actually what woke means.
There you go.
I'm awakened. I have this gnosis. And then, well, you're in this weird, obscene death cult.
Yeah, just don't be woke. Don't be just woke, guys. Let's be awakening.
Awakening.
Always.
Yes.
It's a verb. It's an ongoing process. It's a constant recalibration. You're going to find out that you're wrong about things, but if you're okay with finding out, if you care most about what is true and right and good for one and all, then it doesn't matter how many times one is individually wrong. In fact, you can get excited and happy when you find out, oh, I was wrong about that. I just learned something new. I just upgraded. Now I can see a little bit more widely. Of a perspective, and I can understand more people.
Why limit yourself with just one kind of knowing and then think you have it all? Because usually, like, the modern end of knowing is just like experience knowing, like my life experience knowing. But there's a lot of different types of knowing within your experience. Are you talking about like your perspective experience, or are you talking about the experience of you participating in something, or are you talking about, now is this nested within the having mode or within the being mode? Like,
where are you coming from?
It's not a stopping point. Everything is constantly in and out, and then growing out, and then collapsing again, and then growing out again. Just stopping is the worst thing you can. Well, that's.
Yeah, you don't want to freeze that relevance realization process. You don't want to get too convinced or too certain. Certainty is a dangerous thing. Rather than having any complete 100% certainty about anything, just have scales, levels of certainty about different subjects, and always leave them open to reinterpretation and new information.
Yeah.
How else are we going to navigate through all of the BS that is around us today? Because it's on both sides. It's not just on the side that you disagree with. That's a hard thing for people to swallow, and that's where our egos get in the way. We get identified and attached to our ideas, but we are not just our ideas. We have ideas. Who is the who that has the idea, guys?
So practice disagreeing with yourself.
Yeah.
Devil's advocate just doesn't work just with
and having
conversations
meaningful
with others,
disagreement. Like DJ and I in the beginning of this episode, we were disagreeing because literally came just down to what do you mean by your term when you say this? What do I mean? But we did that without any animosity or personal feelings, and we worked through it, and we figured out what each other were talking about, and that's it. That's what we got to do with one another, with our friends, family.
Came up.
Check this guy out.
Yeah, he wants to be a star. We gotta. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, there he goes.
Hey.
Woo! Yeah.
Little dude.
Give the Beatles some thumbs up, guys. There he goes. Yeah, he's feeling.
He's ascending.
He's ascending.
Well,
he went to the transcendent realms and he came back to tell us about it.
Oh boy! Before we get stuck playing with a bug. Oh boy, you're supposed to be outside, dude.
Yeah, let's let this little guy out, and we're gonna let you all go.
Yeah.
Once again, we love you guys, and we will see you next time.